All right. We are back. It's been a long time. Been a long time on the flagship channel here at Couch Potato General Manager. We've had a live stream, but I couldn't think of a better time than the 2026 NFL draft. On to day two in the 2026 NFL draft, and fairly eventful day one. The second round is already underway. San Francisco traded down, I believe, a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken. Um, and they are slated to make the first selection on day two. Thought process is they need to account for someone that can hold up against Byron Murphy. That's a lot of the chatter that you hear from the San Francisco 49ers faithful. I thought with Omar Cooper on the field, them looking to kind of replenish that receiving room, that he might be the pick, but they ultimately traded out of the first round. So we'll get a sense of what this pick is going to be here in just a second. Some of you may already know as things move faster, depending on where you are, what type of service you're using to watch, to take in the information. So, um, bear with me if I'm lagging a little bit behind the telecast where you're at, or however you're consuming the 2026 NFL draft. And okay, Dejon Stribling, a big time riser late in the process. Late in the process, size, speed, combination that he offers, catches everything. Had a really strong season. You know, Trinidad Chambliss obviously was the engine there in terms of the quarterback play, but certainly Stribling was really effective throughout most of the season. I think perhaps the one outlier being, or the main outlier, I should say, was against LSU and Mansour Delane. I thought Mansour Delane, obviously sixth overall pick. The Chiefs actually traded up a few spots to go and get him. Did a good job against Stribling, but more often than not, Stribling was handling business. And again, he tested very well in the pre-draft process, the combine. You put that together with some strong tape, and you have an ascending player. And of course, he's the first selection here on day two of the draft. And I didn't do a live stream, which has been customary over the years. I didn't do a live stream yesterday covering the first round. Just wanted to enjoy it as like everyone else, as a consumer of the NFL and certainly the NFL draft. That's really our focus here at Couch Potato General Manager. But day two, it's just more interesting to me, right? Most mocks consist of just the first round. Obviously, there are more in depth mocks, but typically, you get a good sense. You get a good sense. You're batting usually 85, 90%, maybe not necessarily player and team, but certainly player when it's all said and done. So there really aren't a ton of surprises. There may be a handful, but not a ton of surprises. I think day two, day three is when teams really separate themselves. Of course, when you're trying to address the quarterback room, how you manage to do so, if you're able to do so effectively, goes a long way in terms of the success of your football team. But certainly, the nuts and bolts of rosters are built throughout day two and day three, and there's still a lot of talent on the board. I would say probably through the first four rounds, I feel really good about the talent in this draft. I know there are people who, especially in the fantasy community, don't necessarily care for the offensive weapons top to bottom, and that's fair. When you juxtapose it against some previous draft classes, and certainly what we're anticipating in 2027, that's okay. That's fair. But a lot of good actual reality football players in this class, certainly through the first, I'd say 140, 150 selections. They're going to be gems. They're going to be gems later in day three as well. But I feel really good about the talent top to bottom through the first four rounds of this draft. So I expect really good football players to come off the board, and of course, Stribling is a good one. Is a good one. I think I may lean towards a Chris Bell, but of course he's coming off the injury, so there's that particular concern. So when you juxtapose it against everything, it makes a ton of sense. The Cardinals just made their selection. Of course, they decided to go with Jeremiah Love in the first round. A little bit not surprising because obviously there's been a lot of buzz around that, but I'm not sure that I agree with the approach. That's not an indictment of Jeremiah Love at all. He's the best offensive player in this class. But certainly, I don't think this roster is necessarily prepared to drop a high first round pick, top three pick, using that on a running back. Albeit, he's more than a running back. He is a weapon. They follow that up with Chase Besantis, who obviously, from a pass protection perspective, is a really good player, right? I think he's ready to go from that perspective. I think there's some work to do in terms of run blocking, but from a pass protection perspective, the upside, I should say, is certainly there. It's interesting because I guess perhaps he's just the best offensive lineman on their board at this juncture. They really need a tackle. And I thought that might be the direction they go in on day one. Doesn't appear that was, well, clearly, that was not the approach. That's not how they went about addressing the top of this draft. So interesting decision there. I've muted the broadcast, so I'm not sure what the analysis is around that in terms of the player and corresponding team fit, but it seemed to be a more significant need at the tackle position. That said, it isn't as if they can't improve at guard, right? And again, if you're higher on Besantis is one of the higher players on your board. I can understand it from that perspective. I'm not sure how Arizona Cardinals fans feel about that. I know Dana, our resident Cardinals fan, typically, patronizes or is a patron of these live streams. Her thought process was, we need to obviously protect the quarterback, which DeSantis can do, but more probably in the form of a tackle, and then of course pass rush. That was the expectation. Third overall, it didn't work out that way. They do come back to the offensive line, but maybe not what people thought. Perhaps now, again, I'll reiterate it once more. A lot of tackles came off the board, some of which are probably going to be playing guard at the next level, at the NFL level in the first round. I believe it was 7 through the first 32 picks. And given that there's a bit of a drop off, there's a bit of a drop off. You secure the interior of the offensive line. If you have an opportunity to improve it, certainly can make a case for that. The Buffalo Bills are now on the clock. And the Bills traded down several times. They traded down several times. I thought the Bills might trade down. I didn't expect them to trade out of the first round completely. But as I said at the top of the live stream here, there's a lot of really good football players still on the board. And frankly, I did not see Stribling being the first player off the board here on day 2. There was a chance perhaps Besantis went in the first round, albeit I did not have them that high on my board. But certainly things have gotten off to an interesting start here. So let's see what Buffalo does here. TJ Parker, which makes a ton of sense. I thought Parker was going to be around that first round, second round turn. There's definitely a need at edge. The Buffalo Bills are going through a bit of a transition in terms of their defensive scheme, moving to more of a 34, moved off of Teron Johnson, who's been a really good nickel over the years. So I think they're going to be playing a lot more base defense, and they need pass rush. They need pass rush from the edge. I think they got some talented young players along the D line. Starting with my guy Walker out of Kentucky. But in terms of Rousseau, there really wasn't. I preface this by saying, or I shouldn't say preface this. I've already let the cat out of the bag, but certainly bringing in Bradley Chubb helps. But that's not enough. That's not enough. We haven't seen Bradley Chubb play at the level that he once did. Of course, he's dealt with numerous injuries. The Dolphins in their reset moved off of him. So I think rounding out that pass rush now by adding TJ Parker to the mix was a good move. He has some work to do in terms of secondary and tertiary pass rush moves. I always talk about it's great. You got the physical tools. You got a pretty good first step. You can execute a bull rush, a long arm. But what do your counters look like, right? If the offensive tackle wins early in the rep, what do you go to at that point? And I think that's the area that he's going to have an opportunity to continue to improve. But all in all, a good player. One of the more steady players coming from Clemson this year. A couple of them are now off the board through the first 35 selections. The Houston Texans are up next. And of course, they went with Keelan Rutledge in the first. And I not surprised at the position. So frankly, I'm not surprised at the player because Rutledge had kind of moved, from a consensus perspective into that second or third spot in terms of interior offensive linemen. So I thought he was more of a day two prospect, though. On my film review, thought he was more of a day two prospect. But the Texans clearly, placing a premium on addressing the offensive line. That group really struggled, for at times throughout the season, but certainly they got exposed in the playoffs. It was bad. It was bad. They bring in Braden Smith to hold down right tackle. They did add Wyatt Teller, so he gives you some flexibility. Perhaps you don't get your guy in Reynolds there at the bottom of the first. They actually traded up for him a bit. It's a little bit of a contingency plan, but I expect Reynolds to certainly make a case to start. He also took some snaps, going through the offseason process, the Senior Bowl, whatnot. He took some snaps at center, so we'll see exactly how they deploy him. If any Texans fans happen to you know poke their head in here on this live stream, I think I'd be curious to know what the plan is there, if they have any insight with respect to how they're going to address their offense. All right. Got a little bit of a commercial break here. So I'm going to take a commercial break. I'll be back in just a minute. All right. So we have a trade. Okay. The Texans traded up in the first round. So they do a little bit of a trade down here, drop down a couple of spots, and the Raiders and Texans exchange third and fourth round picks. So just to kind of help recoup some of that draft positioning they lost as a result of the trade up, the Texans have a good complement of picks. So a bit of a shrewd trade there. I may have had that backwards. I may have had that backwards. The Texans moving up again, being aggressive in their approach as they target their players. So let's see who they ultimately select after having traded up. Yeah, I mentioned Keelan Rutledge. I mentioned his the prioritization of the offensive line, and it's hard to argue with that. It really is hard to argue with that approach, right? Like it's a matter of importance like none other. It's the most important position group. Um, this selection makes a ton of sense. And I'm sure, especially you can see the emotion on Caden McDonald's face as relates to the fact that he was in the green room. It didn't happen last night, and then he hears his name fairly early here on day two. I had him bottom of the first, early parts of day two, because he hasn't demonstrated the pass rush ability, and that may never come. But what he does up front in terms of two gapping and holding up at the point of attack is really impressive, and it's almost unfair, this Texans defense, right? That was one of the few areas that they needed to address. Certainly on the defensive side of the ball, they're pretty buttoned up there, but they did need to become a bit more stout through the interior of their defense, up the middle. They obviously have the pass rush. I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they actually add, one of those attacking three technique one guys. But K McDonald, 1 year start at Ohio State, he cleared the runway for Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese for all of their ability and their processing and athleticism. Caden McDonald, was doing the dirty work and really making it, conducive to the success of that of Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles. So, um, I probably took McDonald in a mock draft or two leading up to this particular to this particular draft, this 2026 NFL draft, and it just makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. The Texans, with their first two selections of this draft, addressing the trenches on either side of the ball. So, I like that pick quite a bit. So we got up next. We got the New York Giants up next, and of course, and that may make sense. That may make a certain amount of sense, right? Um you have the Dexter Lawrence trade. The Giants are sitting in front of you. They certainly have a need at nose tackle. Whomever the preferred nose tackle is, because there's a couple of guys there. Kristen Miller certainly comes to mind. Lee Hunter as well. Whoever your preferred guy is, you probably want to go up and secure them, and that explains why the Texans traded up a bit there in order to acquire their guy. So makes a ton of sense. Right. See what the Giants do here shortly. Going back to the Giants, they very well could address the nose tackle position here. I'm a big fan of Kristen Miller. I actually think Kristen Miller offers a little bit more upside from a pass rush perspective as compared to a McDonald. But what they do in the first round, as the draft kind of unfolds, is they grab Arvell Reese, and at first blush you think, okay, well, what are we going to do? We drafted a player that's kind of in that same mold in the form of Abdul Carter. Um, I don't think it hurts having good players. Reese clearly can play at the second level, and then of course he's an effective blitzer, right? He's proven to be a better blitzer than pass rusher. He hasn't had as many of those true pass rush opportunities, right? I think the long term goal, probably assuming he goes to the Jets, is that he does become an edge. But who knows? Who knows? Harbaugh, and company, they may have designs to play Abdul a little bit more off ball. Who knows exactly how they're going to deploy them or make them interchangeable? But it creates some serious consternation for opposing defenses once those guys figure things out. And Carter in the second part of the season really started to put it together. He started to kind of figure out, how I actually can make plays, right? That rookie learning curve. So I expect big things from him in year two. Of course, you got Burns, who is terrific in his own right. And then you drop Reese into the mix. And like I said, he can play at the second level. You have a fairly significant need there at the second level. Very poor run defense a season ago. His physicality, his athleticism, particularly moving forward, it plays right away. And then, of course, the added bonus and what you think he might become long term, given the opportunity from a pass rush perspective, it makes a lot of sense. So I understand why they stopped that quote unquote slide, right? And then they followed it up with the 10th overall pick with Francis Mauigoa. And you can see obviously Canes representing the Canes in the background here. It appears, again, this is one where I would ask Giants fans, what's the plan here? But it appears that they're going to move Mauigoa into the guard at first blush. Maybe Illuminor kicks back into the interior of the offensive line. He has experience, but we'll see. But I mean, the offensive line is now buttoned up as well, right? You get arguably the most, the defensive player with the most upside in this class, and then of course, 3-year starter, really polished offensive lineman there, Maui Noah. I like this pick here for the Giants. That was another area of need in terms of corner. They go with Colton Hood, and Hood put together a pretty strong performance this season. I thought he was okay during the Senior Bowl, competed But what I love about Colton Hood's game is how patient he is in his back pedal, right? He doesn't let the receiver necessarily dictate to him. You know what I mean? And with young defensive backs, that's typically a challenge. He's fairly confident at the catch point. That also is one of those things that kind of separates cornerbacks. So I like the addition here. What's interesting is, and what this has been telling me in terms of what transpired in the first round. Only two corners selected in the first round, and then Hood coming off the board ahead of the former Vol in Mod McCoy. Now, of course, McCoy, considering how well he played in 2024, probably in the conversation for the top corner, assuming he was healthy in 2025. It appears that there's still concerns about his injury, right? Like he's not quite right, even though he went through the motions in terms of his pro day. It appears there are more concerns about his health than we may have thought. So he's sliding as far as I'm concerned, because from a talent perspective, he's definitely a first round uh, player. Now, Raiders traded down. Their pick is in. Let's see what direction the Raiders go in. Of course, they went with Mendoza at the top. Foregone conclusion that's the worst kept secret in this particular draft. I've talked about Mendoza quite a bit on the channel ad nauseum, really, in terms of why he is deserving, why he's made hay, in terms of his really impressive performance throughout the 2025 season, and of course all of not just the physical tools but the intangibles, the toughness, the ability to rebound from a negative play. So really like um what they have in Mendoza, and interested to see here. Do you go with maybe a Denzel Boston? I know this was a scenario that Raiders fans thought, if he's available, you got to go with him. You got to help him out. You need a bigger frame receiver to add to that room. They have a fairly significant need at nose, as I mentioned. Kristen Miller's there. And then, of course, they need safeties. I think they can improve at corner too. That may come a bit later, but they need safeties. And I wouldn't rule out the offensive line. I know there's a belief trade on Stoops. So yes, they prioritize the safety here. Now, I got several players ahead of Stooks, but Stooks clearly is really well liked in the NFL community. Very well liked in the NFL community. He's kind of that safety nickel hybrid. Really, really good player. Don't get me wrong. Older player, but really good player. Um, depending on the type of player that you're looking for, I can certainly understand it. And there were rumblings that Stooks might actually go in the first round. So, clearly significant need at safety for the Raiders. They need two of them. They need two starters. So I understand the selection. There are a couple guys I liked a little bit more. I like Halsey a bit more. McNeil Warren is there. Especially considering that you have Teron Johnson at the nickel. I wonder what the plan is, how they plan on deploying these defensive backs here for the Raiders, because again, Stooks played a lot of nickel, played at a very high level, but played a lot of nickel. You make a trade to acquire Teron Johnson, a proven commodity at the NFL level, really one of Buffalo's most steady defenders over the years, and then yes, understanding that Stooks kind of plays that hybrid role of both nickel and safety. You have some pure safeties on the board that I think, at least for my purposes, were higher on the board. But again, clearly, the NFL is a bit higher on Stooks than I was. So interesting. As far as who those safeties were, I like AJ Halsey. I mentioned Emmanuel McNeil Warren, who I thought might push into the first round. I expect his name to be called here in fairly short order. And then my guy, Bud Grant. I love Bud Grant. Older prospect, not unlike Stooks, but incredibly productive and talented. He does it all, right? And I gotta say, I feel more confident in Bud Grant being in the deeper parts of the field than I do Stooks, to be honest with you. So interesting selection. Interesting selection. We'll see how the Raiders ultimately deploy him. On a bit of a commercial break here. If they stay on that commercial break, I'm going to step away for just a moment. I'll be right back. All right, we are back, and the pick is in. We are moving right through the second round here. Of course, they've adjusted the time for each pick, which I think is a good move. I think that's a good move. You want to keep things flowing, moving along. Cleveland's on the clock, and of course, Cleveland did their trade down in the first. They ended up with Spencer Fano with the ninth overall pick. And I anticipated Fano would be picked in the top half of the first. I did not expect him to be the first um, offensive lineman taken off the board. And I imagine they plan on playing him at left tackle. So I think there's some work to be done there. I think Fano probably would be a better interior offensive lineman, to be perfectly frank. But very, very, differing feelings with respect to those top tackles, all those names that went in the first round. And then they manage to help out the quarterback, help the quarterback out, right? Casey Concepcion, perhaps the best separator in the class with the 24th overall pick. So we'll see. We'll see that this team could very well go back to the perimeter. I wouldn't rule out going back to the offensive line in some capacity. Just kind of depends on how you feel about some of the veteran free agents they brought in, but that there weren't a ton of long term deals associated with that. And there you go, right back to the perimeter. And I like it. I like it. Denzel Boston, really good selection. Really good selection. I think the hate has gone a bit too far with respect to Denzel Boston. I do think this is probably the best area for him. Anywhere from 28 to 40, he goes 39th overall to Cleveland. Cleveland in need of pass catchers, right? Harold Fenton was really the only consistent threat in the passing game this past season, and now you add Concepcion, who separates with the best of them. Got to clean up some drops, but the way he accelerates after the catch, how dynamic he is with the ball in his hands, and the fact that he creates a ton of separation goes a long way. That makes things easy on your quarterback. And then Boston is the type of player that you can trust. You can trust in those contested situations. I think he's a little bit better of a separator than probably generally given credit for, although I don't expect him to create tons of separation. You're probably going to have to scheme some things up for him, but he is excellent, excellent in the contested situations. And I also don't view him at the NFL level as a pure X, right? He can play the X. He has the frame for it, but you want him working as a big slot more so than anything else. I think that's probably where he'd be at his best. But again, the ability to make plays in traffic, the strong hands, the ability to track the football effectively, and perhaps some underrated ability to actually separate as well. I think what Cleveland has managed thus far, albeit there was a couple tackles that I liked a little bit more than Fano. But again, I can't knock them addressing the offensive line. Clearly, a point of emphasis throughout this offseason. And then to follow that up with both Concepcion and Denzel Boston, Cleveland's off to a really good start. And they have a lot of draft capital to continue to round out this roster. See what the Chiefs do here. The Chiefs have two first round selections, of course, Mansour Delane to get things started. And then they follow that up with the interior defensive lineman from Clemson, Peter Woods. And I want to talk about that a little bit after this selection. So let me see who Casey goes with. I kind of like an edge. There's some good edge names on the board right here. I'd like to see an edge come off. R. Mason Thomas. There you go. There you go. Very good pick. Very, very good pick. Kansas City needs pass rush. They need pass rush. It's been Chris Jones or nothing. And Chris Jones is not the same player he once was, where you could count on Chris Jones to make a play to secure the win to get you off the field in these one score games, which is customary in the NFL. He's not quite the same player, but now when you have threats like R. Mason Thomas and you can play Peter Woods at a three technique, right, and let him use some of his quickness and get up field. I like I said, I'm going to talk about Peter Woods a little bit more, but R. Mason Thomas is a ball of fire off the edge, right? He is very unlike what they've had, the Karloftises and the gentleman from Kansas State. His name's escaping me right now. They did draft Omar Norman Lott and Ashton Gelati, whom players that I kind of like on day two last year. So we'll see what kind of step they take going into 2026. But I think you have the makings of a young group that has some depth and could be a decent rotation. And I think that's going to be very important for Peter Woods in particular, because In 2024, going into summer scouting last year, Peter Woods was considered maybe the top prospect in the class. Definitely in that conversation among the first five or so selections, right? And then, of course, it didn't pan out well. It didn't pan out well for Clemson, and certainly for Woods. The production really fell off. Of course, there was some usage concerns, but I think that was overblown. I actually think the usage part of it was overblown. Maybe coaching may have been an issue, but the usage wasn't necessarily my primary issue. It was it was the fact that I think he played too many snaps. Right? He played upwards of an additional 150, 160 snaps, and he wasn't the same player. So I think I think you keep him on a pitch count now that you have some depth, now that you can develop a rotation and he can be very good. I like the way Kansas City has attacked things to this point. Got the Bengals up next. Let's see here. Recap so far. Dribbling over Hurst was a hunt for me. Arizona will play Bisontis at tackle. Do you think it's funny Buffalo has an addiction to power pull rushers? Um, the dribbling over Hurst for me isn't crazy. Ooh, I like that pick, Bengals. Cassius Howe. Yeah, the Bengals clearly prioritizing being able to actually get stops, right? They make the trade for Dexter Lawrence, and then Cassius Howe, but for the shorter arms, should be a first round selection, right? They've invested heavily over recent years at edge, but nothing is stuck to this point. Nothing is really stuck. And um, to get Cassius Howe, a proven commodity, a better player than his former teammate, now NFL teammate Shamar Stewart. Stewart has all of the measurables and the traits and so on and so forth. But as far as productivity and ability to actually get to the quarterback, even going back in terms of his part-time role a season ago, he was more effective than not only Stewart, but even Scorton, whom I like quite a bit, right? He was more effective on fewer snaps than those guys. And then, of course, he really made a name for himself this past season. But going back, TVTDA1, to your questions, dribbling over Hurst isn't crazy to me. My concern with Hurst in particular is physicality over the middle of the field. With that frame, I would expect him to be a bit more physical. I don't think it's a huge disparity between those players, but I'm okay with dribbling. I just didn't expect either of them to go that early. Um, do they play Basantis at tackle? Maybe. That was a question that I had, at the top of this thing. Once the Cardinals made their pick was, there's a clear need at right tackle. So, do you feel Basantis can play tackle? Pass protection is where he makes his hay. There's a certain level of athleticism there. Maybe they feel that way. I'm not convinced of that, but perhaps they feel that way. Saints making their selection, and another really good one. This is one of my favorite players in this class, Kristen Miller, right? Now you put Kristen Miller next to Brian Brzee, and it's problems. It's problems up front. I still think they need a little bit more juice on the edge. Carl Granderson and Chase Young are bigger, stouter players at the point of attack. And I'm not suggesting that they shouldn't be part of the panacea, the solution as far as the pass rush is concerned, but I think they need a little bit more speed on the edge. But Miller and Brzee up front that's tough sledding. That's tough sledding. Once Miller finds his footing at the NFL level, they're going to be really good up front. And then your last question here regarding, do I think it's funny Buffalo has an addiction to power bull rushers? Um, I think it's okay. I think clearly they want their edges with a bit more size to them. To kind of meet certain measurables as far as length and being able to really hold up at the point of attack, set a physical edge, as well as give you something in the pass rush, right? Um, it's clearly the archetype that they favor. The question is, are they going to develop into guys who are more than just a six and a half, 7 sack guy, right? Are they capable of taking games over? I don't know that their defensive mentality is that way. Now, Parker could develop into one of the better edges in the class, right? But to your point, he is a little limited in his approach right now, right? The parts of the game that you can't teach, he has. So that's a good starting point, right? He has a good first step quickness. He does have, that length that helps him. He, in addition to the bull rush, the ability to convert speed to power, he can use an effective long arm. It's the secondary, tertiary pass rush moves. You want to see a spin move. You want to see a more effective rip. You want to, you know what I mean? There's certain things from a counter perspective when the offensive tackle wins early in the rep that you want to see from him. But I think he's a player that still has a lot of room to grow, right? And it doesn't surprise me. That's just their type in Buffalo, right? They want bigger edges that can kind of hold up at the point of attack. They favor those guys over perhaps the really twitchy edge rushers. So I don't hate it. I don't hate it for Buffalo. Buffalo needed to address edge on top of the addition of Chubb, so it makes sense. Okay, Miami is on the clock, man, and I got to tell you, I'm gonna join my good buddy Jake NFL Draft. Obviously, he's doing his stream over on his channel currently. So, if you want to bounce back and forth between any other streams, that's the one that I will allow at this point. But um, I'm interested to have a conversation with him after we recap day 3 regarding the approach the Dolphins took there at the top. Right, they trade out of a spot where to me you couldn't go wrong with Bain or Downs. Right, in my opinion, you couldn't go wrong with it. Dallas really coveted Downs, which is understandable. So they added a couple of a little draft capital. This is a team, the Dolphins. Well, while they're in the midst of a rebuild, they have a lot of draft capital. You want to perhaps maximize the number of picks you have, but to me, if you target a particular player, you can go get them. But it seems that former Green Bay front office mentality in terms of big players is the emphasis. So they trade out of their spot 11, just one spot down, and then they ultimately take Caden Proctor, whom is a very polarizing prospect in this class. There's no question about it. Proctor is polarizing, right? He's had issues with his weight, albeit much better shape this offseason as getting prepared for this process. Tons of talent, tons of ability, really athletic considering how big he is. He's nearly 6'7", 350 pounds. There's a school of thought that he needs to play guard, that he's going to have to start his career at guard and then ultimately, hopefully, move out to tackle, right? And I think that's the best case scenario for him, honestly. But I'd have been hard pressed to pass up both Downs and Bain. Bain's a local kid, not just for the storyline, but you know the mentality, the mentality, the productivity, the physicality. You want attitude, you want workmanship. You know what I'm saying? There's no question marks with Bain. You talk about Proctor trying to get his weight under control and actually showing up in shape for a change. Bain transformed his body, right? At the behest of his, defensive line coach, Jason Taylor, Hall of Famer. Like he said, listen, you want to take your game to the next level. You need to you need to do a recomposition of your body. The fat that Bain was carrying as he was playing more 2-eye and 3 technique on top of edge in previous seasons, he got it off and he started bending the edge like a madman. So I was a little disappointed on behalf of Dolphins fans that they passed on both Downs and Bain. But then, of course, and later in the first round, of course, they traded the Jalen Waddle to Denver. I think they also moved up to ensure that they drafted the only other corner besides Mansour Delane that was selected last night, and Chris Johnson, who is very talented. He's got the movement skills. He's got very good the technique in terms of mirror matching, keeping his eye on that inside hip, and then excellent ball skills. He looks very comfortable at the catch point. He lacks a certain level of physicality. Daryl Jeremiah was talking about how physical he is, and he's a willing tackler. But I think he needs to challenge receivers more at the line of scrimmage with all of that ability. If you can then on top of that disrupt the time and disrupt the release instead of giving free access, he could be that much more effective. The Dolphins probably made, at least to this point, of their 3 selections, this is my favorite one, Jacob Rodriguez. Mind you, I'm a big CJ Allen fan. I'm a big CJ Allen fan, and he's sliding a bit here. But Jacob Rodriguez, man, the productivity is insane. And of course, they have a couple linebackers there, but clearly high on Rodriguez, and for good reason. For good reason. One of the best players in college football this past season. His ability to create opportunities for your offense is really uncanny. Like he just has a feel for punching the ball out. He'll get in the passing lane, make plays that way. Just a magnet to the football, right? And there's a lot of linebackers in this class that have a pretty elevated missed tackle rate. That's probably the one thing that you want to clean up a little bit, but one pick away from biting kneecaps, right? Um, yeah, yeah. Rodriguez is a really good one. He's a really, really good one. And he's gonna he has that, like I said, that innate ability to create instant offense, right? To create a short field for your offense, give Malik Willis and company, Devon A. Chain, a short field to work with and help put points on the board. Detroit not wasting any time here, though. They trade up, as you mentioned, with the Jets. So the Jets dropping down 6 spots and adding a fourth round pick. So the Jets clearly, like I said, through the first 4 rounds of this draft, first 140 to 150 picks, a lot of talent, a lot of talent. And the Jets seemingly are loading up. Yes, yeah, that's a good comp. The peanut punch, obviously, he's perfected it at the second level of the defense. He's perfected that punch, right? Looks like big Megatron. Is that Megatron? It's my guy Megatron making the pick. Gold jacket Megatron. Let's see what the Lions do here. Derek Moore. And I like it. You keep the Michigan kid home. Keep him in the state. He speaking of biting kneecaps, Derek Moore is physical, right? Where I would like to see, generally speaking, you give me a physical player all day, every day of the week. Where I would like to see him, leverage a little bit more athleticism. Derek Moore wants to go through your face mask every single time. That's what he wants to do. He wants to go directly through your face mask. He jars tight ends, linebackers. It's a collision. It is a collision. Looks like I'm having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Let me see if I can get this back. What happened there? Bear with me as I address this technical difficulty. All right, we should be back. We should be back in play here. Yes, yes, the Derek Moore selection. Let's see here, people. Yeah, no, 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 no. I didn't hear that. For someone to suggest that, that's asinine. That makes no sense. Um, no, Derek Moore is a lot of fun to watch. As I mentioned, the physicality is impressive. I think he too can stand to add, some counters and some additional pass rush moves, but he's coming like a bat out of hell off that edge. And it's exactly what the doctor ordered. They needed to address the offensive tackle position. They did that in the first round. They then follow it up with, their to me, in my opinion, their 1A, 1B, whatever you want to call it, need in terms of an edge rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson. And I like the fact that they're keeping him in the state of Michigan. That's a very good football player with a lot of room to improve. He's going to get plenty of opportunities as opposing offenses slide protection to Aiden Hutchinson to try to control him. They're going to try to block more on the backside with the tight end, and that's going to go poorly. You're going to get your quarterback cut in half. He's going to have a lot of one-on-one opportunities, and it's like you said, in terms of biting kneecaps, this guy kind of embodies that. This guy definitely embodies that. Yeah, yeah. More. The notion that he was a late day 3 pick is crazy to me. This is the sweet spot for edge rushers. This The second round to me is the sweet spot. There's going to be a run at corner as well. I'm sure that's coming at some point. But you still got the likes of so you had R. Mason Thomas come off the board. You had TJ Parker come off the board. Um, Derek Moore was just selected. You got guys like Zion Young. You got Gabe Akis out there. Lawrence went a little bit earlier than I had anticipated, but I shouldn't be surprised. I know Jake was all over Lawrence. There's a relationship there with Dallas and the coaching staff, having coached him at UCF. So no, there's some good ones. There's some good ones, and by and large, they're a physical group. They're a physical group. They get after it. They have a certain level of explosiveness. Again, a couple things that they need to work on, all of them, but certainly they're bringing bad intentions, and that's exactly what you're looking for in a league where you're trying to get guys off the field. You're trying to get offenses off the field. You're trying to get stops late in the game. You need those pass rushes to make a play. Bat the ball down, create a hurry, create a poor throw, get the quarterback on the ground. It's imperative that you get the pass rush right. I failed to mention Cassius Howell going to the Bengals. I love it. I love it. So yeah, this is the run. This is the edge run that I had definitely anticipated. It's a deep position group, and for that reason, that's why I expected Arizona to go offensive line in the first round, right? Potentially. Or in this particular instance, they went with Jeremiah Love because you could get that guy. Now they decided to focus on the O line with their second pick, but there's still quite a few. Joshua Joseph out of Tennessee is available. I mentioned Akis. I actually like Akis to the Ravens right here. We'll see who the Ravens come up with. You pair him up with Trey Hendrickson. That could be an impressive duo. But certainly, as I mentioned, this is the sweet spot for edge rushers here. This top half, really through the balance of the second round, and then I think there's a bit of a dip. I think there's a bit of a dip after that, albeit some intriguing, part-time players, right? Pass rush specialists that may be out there. Nadame Tucker, Contavious Hutchins. Those are a couple guys that come to mind there on day 3. Right. I like Akis a lot. I like Akis a lot. I probably like Akis a little bit more than Derek Moore. As much as I like Moore, I think I like Akis a little bit more. Um, I had Cassius Howell over Akis. Parker, young player, maybe right there with him just because of the potential upside. But Akis is the one that from a fan perspective, I probably like the most among these guys. It'll be interesting to see if the Ravens. Zion Young might be in play here. I wouldn't rule out Zion Young here as well. He had a really good season, had a strong pre-draft process. Albeit there's some concerns with some stuff, some shenanigans off the field, so that may be depressing him. But you saw it with Michael Green last year. The Ravens will prioritize the talent. You know what I'm saying, assuming they feel comfortable with all the other stuff, perhaps some baggage. And Mark Ingram making the pick. All right. Let's see. See how we go here. Zion Young. So I called it. Zion Young. Yeah, and I think Zion Young probably has a bit of a higher athletic profile. I think that might be perhaps why they leaned in that direction as opposed to an Akis, right? Some of those traits favor Zion Young, but again, this was really this was really a layup in terms of how I thought the second round, particularly the top half of the second round, was kind of unfold. You have a lot of teams who have needs in terms of pass rush, and you have a lot of players, at this point in the draft, really pushed up at the top of the board, right? So by my count, and I'm just thinking off of memory here, you have R. Mason Thomas, you have Cassius Howell, you have T.J. Parker, you have Zion Young, and I may be missing something, Derek Moore. So and again, as I mentioned, Akis is there. Joshua Josephs is there. One of those guys I mentioned, perhaps maybe more of a day three guy, may push into day two. You know what I mean? Because teams are looking for guys who can, again, help you get off the field. It's one score games. The majority of NFL games end up in being one score games, and the amount of teams that snatch uh, a loss from the jaws of victory on a weekly basis because they just simply can't get off the field. It's staggering. It happens every week, multiple times, and in every time slot you see it happen. Right? You get the opposition into a third and long, and somehow they come up with a 15, 20 yard gain, getting in field goal range. Of course, the kickers are kicking from 60 yards with ease now, 60 plus, and you lose. You know what I mean? So very important. The Bucks managed to get my guy Bain in the first round. So I don't think they're going to go edge here, but off ball linebacker CJ Allen to me makes a lot of sense. See who the pick is. Josiah Trotter. I haven't. I got to tell you, and maybe it's a byproduct of a lack of film study on Trotter. I did not study Trotter as much as a CJ Allen, but there are a lot of people who like Trotter. Like he had quite a few top 30 visits as far as I recall, and I just don't think he's a better player than CJ Allen. I see the tenacity, the physicality, the explosiveness, of course, the pedigree with that name. But I think CJ Allen is just such a high IQ football player that is amazing in the run game. I think he was put in some precarious situations in terms of pass defense. I think certainly as a blitzer, I'll give Trotter the edge, and maybe just some overall physicality. But I thought CJ Allen was a better player. But NFL teams high on Trotter, very high on Trotter, much lower on CJ Allen apparently. Okay, we got the Pittsburgh Steelers trading up. Okay, see what the Pittsburgh Steelers have in mind. I think they're smarting a little bit with Philadelphia trading in front of them for Mekhi Lemon. They were on the phone with Lemon. We're going to make him the 21st overall pick. Um, Again, a team with a lot of draft capital. You don't take that chance. You send a day three pick or maybe even a late third, right, in order to ensure that you get your guy. You know what I'm saying? So at any rate, they missed out, but I like Maxi Hunter quite a bit. They have concerns about Roderick Jones, his health. The recovery isn't going as planned. So that's a good pivot, certainly. But they definitely wanted Mekhi Lemon. Let's see if they add a receiver here or go in a different direction. And I'll just give a heads up for those of you tuning in. I appreciate you tuning in. I will step away when the NFL Network goes to commercial, and then I will be back. I'm just going to kind of stay on that particular cadence with this broadcast. So just keep that in mind. Right. And of course, Pittsburgh is the host city. So you got to have a little bit of fanfare here, a little bit of, pageantry associated with those selections. Jordan Bernard is a player that I've actually mocked to Pittsburgh, at least on one occasion. And as a consolation prize, I would say that's a good one. I would say that's a good one. He's the type of player that you can just drop into your offense and play any of the receiving position. You want him in the X, he can do some of that. Certainly, he probably projects more as a Z, and he makes plays out of the slot as well. So, they make the acquisition of Michael Pittman. This particular regime didn't necessarily draft Roman Wilson as far as head coach is concerned. Didn't draft Roman Wilson, but Wilson finally healthy towards the end of last season. So we'll see where things land with him. And of course, you have DK Metcalf. Now, Metcalf is supposed to be the guy. That's supposed to be the one in that offense. But Metcalf, for whatever reason, tends to be, a little bit of a wild card. Bernard is a polished receiver. I was impressed by him. When Ryan Williams, obviously burst on the scene as a 17-year-old freshman a season ago, and you're thinking sophomore year he's going to take his game up a notch. He had a slump. He was a sophomore slump for him. Bernard took over in the passing game. He was Ty Simpson's best favorite target in the passing game. So it probably smarts that they missed out on Makai Lemon, but to come away with Deanna Choi and then follow that up with Jeremy Bernard, they didn't make the same mistake twice. They decided, you know what, let me ensure that I can secure this player, and it's a good decision because I think the Falcons were probably in the market for a receiver as well. So and Bernard would have been a nice compliment to Drake London. So understanding what other teams may need and positioning that was a good move. They certainly learned their lesson from day one of the draft. All right, let's see what the Falcons are up to. The Falcons are making their first selection of the 2026 NFL draft. Of course, no first round pick so that they could acquire James Pierce. The news coming out that James Pierce may be able to avoid jail time. So as it bodes for the Falcons, assuming he addresses whatever he needs to, that probably works out best. It's probably best case scenario, all things considered, for the Falcons defense. Um, I'm curious. I'm curious about this one. I think Jeremy Bernard probably was in play here. Could they pivot to Chris Bell? Right? Do they feel that Bell's injury, he's far enough along in his rehab, and I think he was on a treadmill running around 18 miles per hour. He's definitely faster than that. So he's not healthy. He's not all the way back yet, but seemingly on track to come back and be a difference maker for some NFL organization. Could it be the Falcons here? I'm sure Headley will be pleased. I'm sure he'd be pleased with a Chris Bell selection here. As a matter of fact, they took a commercial break, so I'm going to take a commercial break right along with them. I'll be back here momentarily. All right. So the Falcons did make their selection, and it is Avian Terrell who's going to join his brother in Atlanta. So that's a nice storyline. That's a nice storyline. And Terrell's a good player. Terrell's a good player. There were question marks in terms of who's going to play along with Terrell on the back end. They can improve on the boundary as well as a nickel. Now that's the question regarding Terrell. Does he play with the physicality to be able to hold up at the nickel? Question mark. But I do think he has the ability to play on the boundary. So nice touch there, Falcons. Very nice touch with the younger brother joining his older brother in Atlanta. I think they can form a pretty good duo. Terrell got a lot of consideration, at least among draft prognosticators, as far as a first round pick. But you could see as the process went along, the fact that he doesn't necessarily have his brother's prototypical size, that probably pushed him out of the first round. But he's a good player. He's played a lot of football at Clemson. Probably not the best of coaching. Probably hasn't gotten the best of coaching, but you could see every year he got better. Every year he improved. So good player. Good player. Looks like Carolina has traded up. They went with Monroe Freeling in the first. Let's see what they do for an encore here after trading up. I don't think they moved up very many spots here. So clearly there's a player that they covet that they're coming up for. Let's see here. Yeah. Yeah, just looking at the broadcast here, the Falcons have done a really good job retooling their defense. It's a young group. Terrell is probably one of the older statesmen, and he's still very much in his prime. So, the older Terrell that is. I love what the Falcons have done over the past couple of drafts here in terms of retooling, or to start here as far as 2026, but certainly last year, coming away with Xavier Watts, whom I'm not sure what the NFL was thinking, him falling all the way into the third, and then Billy Bowman on top of that. Billy Bowman can play your nickel. Jesse Bates is already out there. There's your oldest eldest statesman in that secondary, but it's a good young group at every level. Good young talent at every level. You guys, if you're familiar with the channel, you know how I feel about Brandon Dorless. Ruka Horo is really developed into a nice player in his own right. I expect Jalen Walker to take a lead. Pierce certainly head on right, makes plays as well. So yeah, they're building something there in Atlanta. They certainly are. See what the Panthers do here. I think for my money, it's not a dire need, but certainly they could stand to add another weapon if they're not convinced about Xavier Leggett. Um, I think safety potentially, maybe another pass rusher too. Pass rusher, ooh, Lee Hunter. I like that too. Get another down lineman up there with Derek Brown. I like that pick. That's a good pick. That's a good pick. The Panthers defense last season, to me, really was, led that team. Bryce Young had ups and downs. And there were some instances where Bryce was playing really high level football, and other instances where, he needed his team to pick him up. And the defense, I thought, was the most consistent unit throughout the season. Right. Some may think overachieve, but what they did in free agency in terms of bringing in Devin Lloyd and Jalen Phillips, you know what I'm saying, to kind of add some teeth to the pass rush and in terms of second level defense. Now you add Lee Hunter, whom obviously when he gets that, as Jake puts it, that second foot down, he's very stout at the point of attack, and then he actually gives you a little something in terms of being able to push the pocket. So I like that selection. I like that selection. Any talent you can add around Derek Brown is a good move in my book. I think it also signals a belief. I think it signals a belief in the offensive talent that's currently on the roster. Now, the Panthers will have more opportunities to address the offense if they're so inclined, but there seems to be a belief there. The Monroe Freeling decision, that seemingly probably board need to a degree. I thought by adding Rasheed Walker, whom I thought was going to actually net a fairly lucrative deal in free agency. He did not. He signed a 1 year deal. I thought that was maybe just the band aid to Icky to figure out whether or not Iquanu, who suffered that injury in the playoff game, how long it would take for him to get on the mend. Maybe, even though it seemed like Iquanu turned the corner, maybe this particular brain trust doesn't believe in Iquanu long term, right? So then you go with Monroe Freeland on top of that. Gives you quite a bit of flexibility. You also have Taylor Moton, who's gotten a little bit longer in the tooth at right tackle, so that might be just kind of thinking ahead there. Can't have enough good football players, certainly. So that may portend some of the reasoning, the psychology behind the decision in there in the first round. But following that up with Lee Hunter, adding to like I said, a defense that maybe overachieved a little bit, but certainly has gotten a nice injection of talent through free agency, and then here in the second round, I like what Carolina has going. Trenches, trenches. It's not always the flashiest thing, but it's the most important thing beyond the quarterback position. You know what I mean? And I think there's a belief there in Carolina now, right? They take the Rams to the wire there in the playoff game. There's a belief. There's a belief that they belong. And like I said, they're stuffing this roster with talent. Okay, so the Jets traded down earlier, and now they're gonna make, I believe, their fourth selection here. And the guy that's on the board that I know they brought in Minka, they re-up Andre Cisco, but they didn't this is the first team in since it's the stats been tracked to not have an interception the entire season. Now, there's also the cornerback position, and D'Angelo Pons is sitting there. So for my money, give me Pons, give me Emmanuel McNeil Warren right here for my money. I think either of those players, can be significant difference makers in a much maligned secondary a season ago. I don't see it anyway. I'm actually gonna stay right through this particular commercial break because I'm really interested. I'm really intrigued. Right? There was a need. There was a need. You want to set the deck. Obviously, we want to build it around Geno to a degree, but long term, I imagine the Jets they'll have multiple first round picks next year. Um, I imagine that they will be looking for their quarterback. It's a good bet. It's a better quarterback class next year. You're talking, of course, Arch Manning and Dante Moore, whom probably would be a top five pick in this particular class. Um, you have Darian Mensah, who's transitioned over to Miami. You got a nice battery of options that we're expecting in 2027. So to me, I just focus on stuff in the roster with talent, right? Ty Simpson went earlier than I had anticipated, albeit he's a quarterback, so quarterbacks get pushed up the board. The spot there with the Rams is intriguing. That's a conversation I'll probably have with Jake a little bit during the recap. But this pick screams McNeil Warren, D'Angelo Pons. Pons obviously smaller in nature, smaller in stature, but from ability standpoint, an athleticism standpoint, technique standpoint, hard to argue with how talented he is. Really, no true weaknesses in his game. Or Jamad. I wouldn't be mad at Jamad. If they feel good about the injury history, I wouldn't be mad at that either. I lean Pons because Aaron Glenn was a smaller guy, and it's Pons. It's Pons. It makes too much sense. Listen, had the Jets not traded up into the first round and they were picking 33, right? I'd have been perfectly comfortable with drafting Pons at that pick. This one just makes too much sense. And it really does tell me that the Jamad injury is much more concerning than perhaps that has been let on at this point because he's such a good football player in his own right. But Pons, man, Pons is nails, man. He reminds me a lot of Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn was a smaller corner that played big. He did everything at a high level. For a long time. the competitive nature of Pons, the confidence and the ability. Like I said, like it's not bluster, it's not bravado. It is belief. It is confidence. It's clear on the tape how good of a player he is. I think the Jets are nailing this thing, man. I was a little taken aback by the Sadiq pick, but I get it. I get it as you're trying to add different ways to attack defenses. Certainly they might lean on more 12 personnel, but they end up still getting the receiver. I thought maybe Makai Lemon at that point, but they end up getting the receiver in Omar Cooper Jr. Right, so you know. Looks like I'm having that technical difficulty once more. I will be right back. I do have the Panacea and the Vikings making their pick, so I'll be right back to discuss that. All right, here we go. We're back. All right, Vikings on the clock. The pick is in. This is a team in need of a running back. Safety. McNeil Warren is there once again. They could go corner. Jamal McCoy might be in play here. There's several. There's several other corners. Brandon Cisse, if you're a fan of him, he's available. Yeah, the McCoy injury must really be scaring teams away. It must really, really be scaring teams away. And of course, having had more than a year to recover, to not participate at the combine, I knew that teams were taken aback by that. Like I said, he was moving around, seemingly roaming around fine at his pro day, but there seems to be more fire around that injury and the healing process than perhaps we may have been aware of going into the draft. Okay, Jake Galday. Okay. Um, I don't hate it. I think you got Cashman going into the last year of his deal. Galday, is I think he's the type of player that Brian Flores covets. You know what I'm saying? And then of course Eric Wilson is a little bit older, although he's playing best football of his career. He's a little bit older, so interesting selection there. That may just be hey, listen, we got guys that expiring contracts, longer in the tooth. He's high up on our board. He's the next, you know what I'm saying? And but you can see that they're kind of building this thing through the middle. They started with Caleb Banks. They're following up with Galday here. The next pick should be, in that secondary. That's the way it seems to be shaping up here for the Vikings. Yeah. I think in terms of best available, it's the likes of an Akis, it's Jermod McCoy, it's Emmanuel McNeil Warren at this point. The Green Bay Packers are making their first selection. I know Jake will be intently paying attention to this one. I'm gonna jump. I'm gonna multitask a little bit. Jump into Jake's live stream just to comment here. So don't mind me. Do not mind me at all. Let's see here. There we go. Give Jake, hit the like button. Do me a favor. If you're hanging around, if you're lurking, hit the like button. Hit the like button on the live stream. I'd appreciate that. Oh, this is a team that could definitely use McCoy. Like, you're looking for certain measurables there on the boundary. Considering how far he's fallen. Again, it's going to come down to you're weighing the risk associated with this injury. Are we talking about something that's degenerative at this point? Because generally speaking, blow out your knee, you have a significant injury like that. Modern medicine, depending on how the body reacts, the way you get after it in terms of your rehab, it usually doesn't portend the end of your career, and it doesn't seem like that's the case. That seems like we're jumping the shark at that point, but it clearly is severe enough serious enough that teams, aren't betting on the really impressive film from McCoy in 2024. Yeah, yeah. No, he has the goods. He has the goods. But you're right. You're right. He didn't do himself any favors throughout this process. I'd agree with that. No doubt in my mind he has the goods though. See what these messages look like. All right. And we're on a little bit of a commercial break. So I will take this one. I will rejoin you here shortly. All right. Here we are. We got the Packers pick and a lot of good players on the board. Ooh. Brandon Cisse. I know Jake is crushed. I know Jake is crushed, man, but he's talented. He moves very well. He has the desired size measurables, right? Um, he needs to be coached up. He needs to be coached up a bit, right? There's some rough film in there, but he has the stuff you can't teach, right? So you bet on that. You bet on that here. Young football player too. I think he may be 20 at this point. So there's a ton of upside. There's a ton of upside here. But this is going to be an interesting conversation to have with Jake during our recap. Probably gonna be a joint venture. Showing up on both of our channels here. So I suggest sticking around for that or checking that out in the morning. There's gonna be some really good conversation born out of day two of the draft. Again, this kind of furthers the whole conversation around Jamar McCoy. You know what? I think people feel Pregnon might be a little too finesse, perhaps, or perhaps his age. Maybe they're not as high on him because he's a bit of an older prospect. But I did expect Pregnon off the board by this point. Um, this would be a nice spot here with the Colts for CJ Allen, in my opinion. Um, they could address defensive line. They can go corner. There's a number of different ways. McNeil Warren is still out there. That one is surprising me quite a bit as well. That Emmanuel McNeil Warren is still on the board. But I like the idea of CJ Allen right here. So Zaire Franklin is no longer there. Remember the days of Shaq Leonard? He was at a very high level for a while and kind of fizzled out. So I think a green dot in the middle of this defense is what the doctor orders. But we'll see. We'll see ultimately what they decide to do here momentarily. course, Pat McAfee has to, do his thing, I suppose. Um, it doesn't surprise me that the centers aren't off the board yet. I do expect them to come off the board in the third, though. Right? Sam Heck out of Kansas State, Connor Liu, maybe Jake Slaughter from UF. Yeah, I think teams at this point, considering the just the board and where the depth is in this class, teams were going to be jockeying for position with respect to the edge and cornerback positions and linebackers for that matter. We've seen a couple of linebackers. I think another one should come off the board here, but Galde, Rodriguez here in the second as well. So yeah, it's been more defense, and there it is, CJ Allen. There it is. To me, that's a home run pick. Right, this is the Colts' first selection in this draft. They didn't have a first round pick. Of course, they traded away to acquire Sauce Gardner from the Jets. And CJ Allen is, like I said, he's the second ranked running back on my second ranked linebacker on my board, I should say. And people may think this is blasphemous, right? I don't think there's as big a gap between CJ Allen and Sonny Styles than clearly the NFL thinks, right? So Sonny Styles has elite size, speed, right? Whereas as Allen isn't the same physically imposing player, right? But when you marry up requisite physicality with football intelligence and IQ, to me, he's right there with Styles. Styles separates because of the physical tools that you just can't teach. This is genetics, right? Allen, you can't teach necessarily football IQ. That to me is innate, and it's cultivated by the player. The player's desire to understand and learn and be a student of the game, right? Albeit, it kind of works hand in hand with coaching. Allen's instincts are off the charts. Go back a couple of seasons. I'm studying Jalen Walker, and of course, they're playing Mondona out there. You got little Ramick Wilson. And number three just keeps showing up. Number three, there's number three again. Who is number three? Is he draft eligible? CJ Allen, put a pin in his name. Going into this year, I thought he'd be the second linebacker off the board. Of course, Jacob Rodriguez had something to say about that. Jake Galde is a different type of body than did more of the outside linebacker overhang thing. But as far as green dots are concerned, CJ Allen is the man. And the thing is that what the Colts get is not only a quality second level defender, they get a leader. They get the brain on the field, right? CJ Allen had a lot of responsibility in Georgia's defense from a schematic perspective, but also making the calls and checks. Where you see a lot of college football teams, either side of the ball, look to the sideline to get the call, to get the audible, to get the adjustment. CJ Allen's making those calls real time. So you got the cognitive load of that as a fairly young player on top of playing, high-end talent there in the SEC week in and week out. Yeah, man. Love CJ Allen to the Colts. The Philadelphia Eagles with Star Wars. Yeah, I gotta agree with you. And this is a Howie Roseman special, right? When Howie identifies an area that he needs to address, he's going to attack it relentlessly. AJ Brown, for all intents and purposes, is a New England Patriot, right? So we're taking a step back in terms of our lead receiver. So what do? We bring in Hollywood Brown. We bring in Dontavian Wicks, okay? Right? And then we follow that up with McKylem. We get aggressive in the first, we get McKylem. And then, Dallas Goedert is back on a one-year deal. Not sure if he's going to be playing in Philadelphia beyond the 2026 season. Go get Stowers, right? Hopefully he can learn to block, but that isn't what we're bringing him in to do here, right? We're going to use him in the middle of the field up that seam. Yeah, I agree with you. Styles and Lemon is evil, but it very much lends itself to how Howie Roseman goes about his business, which is, if there's going to be an area of the football team that I feel like needs to be addressed, I'm going to attack it relentlessly. We're going to invest multiple selections, and we're not going to be shy about it. You think back to the Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, the DeJean selections back to back. And he's done this multiple times throughout his career. So as the GM for the Eagles, so it doesn't surprise me at all. That's good news for an offense that's going to look different. It's going to look different this upcoming season. Stepping out once more here with this commercial break, but I will return. All right, I beat the draft out of the commercial break. New England is no longer on the clock. The pick is in, so we're just about finished here with the second round of the 2026 NFL draft. Looks like New England traded up. Looks like they got aggressive here, moved up a bit. Saw a player that they like. So they went with Caleb Lomu in the first. Morgan Moses mans the right tackle position. I'm not sure if they move Will Campbell from left tackle and move him over to the right, but certainly thinking ahead a little bit. Yeah, so the Chargers obviously didn't have a full complement of pick. I'm thinking they only had four entering the draft, maybe five, but maybe even as little as four. They pick up a fourth and a sixth by trade dropping down, about 8 spots. So good trade for the Chargers. That's a good trade. That was an astute move for them. Trying to think about what direction New England might go in. Akis to me, you lost Caleb on Chase on the free agency. I think Akis could be potentially in the conversation here. Um, don't know that there's a time. Maybe Max Clare, if you wanted to bolster that. The down linemen, there are a few down linemen that could be considered here. But for my money, I would add some teeth to the pass rush here, right? I would add some teeth to the pass rush. There's some really good corners, slot corners in particular, out there. So there are a couple of those guys out there as well. There's McCoy. Obviously you got Cargo out there, but McCoy, assuming again concerns about the injuries, he could on top of Carlton Davis, scary season. In fact, you're in a position where you don't have to necessarily, you can be patient with McCoy under those circumstances, right? So interested to see who the pick is here. Let's see. I've been nailing them here in the second round, man. Gabe Akis. I've been nailing them. I've been nailing them. I promise you. I promise you. I have no prior insight with respect to these selections. That's why I was so taken aback by the Cisse pick, especially considering I know how my compatriot in this particular industry, Jake, feels about him being a Green Bay fan. But yeah, this makes a lot of sense. right? His motor, his physicality, he's a lunch pail type of guy. Really, really came away impressed by how he performed in Mobile. The sweet spot, as I mentioned, second round for these edge rushers. It made a ton of sense. You got the wrestling background, as you can see. They're showing. Yeah, I'm a fan of this selection. It made sense. Made sense. It's that run on edges is getting towards the end before you have that bit of a drop off. You got denied Dennis Sutton out there. Um, I mentioned Joseph from Tennessee. Bailey's running mate at Texas Tech, albeit he's an older prospect. But there's a bit of a tier break that's right around the corner here. All right, Jaguars, Jacksonville Jaguars, Duval, Roddy. Jaguars making their first selection here in the 2026 NFL Draft. I could see it going in a number of ways for Jacksonville here. I think they could certainly add a player here to the offensive line. I think they have a couple of needs along the offensive line and on the defensive side of the ball, the front seven in particular. Albeit, I might throw it all out, throw all of the need stuff out when you talk about guys like Emmanuel McNeil Warren and so on and so forth. So we'll see how that plays out. Yeah, I don't love Lomu, but at that point in the draft, right, I'm with it. And Akis, like I said, the move up, he fits them to a T. He fits that the mentality that well, I don't know where Vrabel's mentals are at right now, but generally speaking, the mentality that Vrabel and company want to kind of instill, that physicality on the defensive side of the ball. Okay, Jags, what you got? The Jags do what the Jags do, man. The Jags do what the Jags do. I get it. I get it. You don't have much behind Brenton Strange, albeit he's turned some heads here recently. It's bound to happen. Somebody's going to take a tight end in round two. The utility of the position, how many teams use them in so many myriads, whether it be 13, 12 person, whatever the case may be. H back role, inline, flexed, whatever the case may be. I get it. I get it. And there are quite a few tight ends in this class that kind of fall into that mode. But I don't love it. I don't love it. I think there are better football players on the board here, right? Maybe not necessarily at a position to need, but better football players. There have been precious few tight ends taken to this point. I think you could have waited on that. Bears not wasting any time. So the Bears got Thieneman. Thieneman falls to them. Makes a ton of sense, right? They I think like three of their safeties left via free agency. They did bring in Kobe Bryant from Chicago, but Thieneman kind of rounds out that group. I think the Bears need to get to that offense, not offensive line, excuse me, the defensive line, edge or tackle. And for my money, the guy is Grayson Halton out of Oklahoma, man. I'd love to see him, up front there with Montez Sweat. The Bears really, really struggled to affect the quarterback via an interior pass rush. It wasn't there. Grady Jarrett clearly on his last legs. At least it seemed that way last year. You right about that. Yeah, I think Halt makes a ton of sense here. I think deny Dennis Sutton if you want to go edge, certainly could put his hand in the ground, be a nice, running mate there with Montez Sweat. But the only other thing I might say might just go off of considering who their coach is, might just kind of go in a different direction is receiver. I would consider a receiver because, yeah, yes, of course, you've used some fairly early draft capital the last couple of seasons. You got your two main guns on the outside, and then Colston Loveland is going to be obviously a focal point in the passing game as well. But they could use a third receiver. They could use a third receiver, and I think Chris Bell, assuming again how comfortable you are with him coming off of that injury, where he's at in his rehab process, would be a nice addition. Be a nice addition. Kilgore's still alive. Yeah, Kilgore's still alive for you, man. Hey, listen. I ain't mad at you. I ain't mad at you. Kilgore's a baller, man. I still maintain though he's more slot than safety. We'll see. We'll see how he's deployed, but I think he's more slot than safety. Honestly, he's played a lot of snaps. The vast majority of his snaps have been as a nickel defender. You did call Price. You did call Price. I'm gonna tell you, I like the player for you. I don't like where you drafted him. I will say that. But all things considered, at the end of the day, if he's as advertised, it's ultimately going to be worth it. I just considering some of the other players on the board, I would have prioritized a different position. Precious few running backs in this class, though, so I get it. Yeah, yeah. I got to reach out to my boy Rob because he's a Jacksonville Jaguar fan and get his thoughts on this one because I didn't like his pick. That's the one pick I feel like, yeah, I don't know about that one. Right, every other pick I can rationalize. There's some really good selections. Again, hotbed for corners, linebackers, and edge rushers, interior defensive linemen. It's a lot of defense um, in round two, right? A lot of quality football players here in round two on the defensive side of the ball. But um, to kind of just force the tight end in there. Now, Stowers has his limitations in line, but he's a unique matchup problem in the passing game. And you think about the rest of the roster, the configuration of the roster. Ooh, there's the trade that we were talking about earlier this week. Jonathan Grenard um, to the Eagles. So again, how we getting to it, man? You getting to it? I know Dallas Turner's ready to go. It's time. It's time, right? Bernard wanted a contract. His contract was coming to an end. He wanted an extension. He gets the extension from Philly. Um, ooh, big citrus at 64. I like that, Mrs. C. I like that. But the Grenard still is a good player, still, and that's exactly now it makes sense. And now it makes sense. That trade gives you the flexibility to double up in terms of pass catchers with the Eagles as you try to soften the blow with respect to AJ Brown, right? If you got Grenard in the back pocket, you don't have to force the issue. And I wouldn't even consider it forcing the issue, but it just gives you that much more flexibility. There's a lot of good edge rushers Philadelphia could have gone with. They could have done it in the first. They could have done it in the second. Instead, they double up in terms of pass catchers. They make the trade for the veteran Grenard. Had success with that with Jalen Phillips, mid-season last year. It's how he's doing what Howie does, man. It's hard to knock Howie Roseman. It's hard to knock him, man. He knows what he's doing. That's for sure. So yeah, as I mentioned with the Bears, um, I think I think you can go anywhere on the defensive line, and the wild card would be receiver. Ozzie Trapilo did have a fairly significant injury, although they brought in Jedrick Wills to kind of help stabilize. So I don't know that there's a tackle that I love here. Maybe a Jennings Dunker, although he's more of a guard. But I think defensive line is the focus here. I think that's the pick here, and I'm gonna go with Grayson Halton. That's my guy. I think that's the next best three technique in this class. I know folks like the fella from the D3 school, Proctor. Um, who's really good. Don't get me wrong, but I like Grayson Halton a little bit more. See what the Bears do here. Logan Jones. Okay. All right. That one comes as a little bit of a surprise. But I think with that abrupt retiring of their center, that probably makes sense. Now, I didn't have Logan Jones as the top center in the class. I didn't. Um, so they clearly they're clearly fans of his game. He's a good player. Don't get me wrong. But I didn't have him as a top center in the class. As I think about it, though, the selection makes sense, right? They lost the Pro Bowl center, kind of a bit of an abrupt retirement, and trying to keep the continuity. They finally fielded a competent offensive line, and then injuries, retirement has kind of thrown a bit of a wrench into that. I personally think they could have gotten Jones a little bit later, though. Okay, Cleveland getting aggressive here towards the bottom of the second round. And again, when you have lots of draft capital, you can do that. You can manipulate this draft board. You can drop down, you can move up. You know what I'm saying? That's the right thing to do. I think Cleveland having a pretty solid draft, if I must say so, to this point. So let's see what they follow up what they've done to this point. Which again, like I said, they're a better football team for what they've done thus far. Travis Burke. Yeah, yeah. You know what? I think the NFL probably is higher. Maybe not the us of the world, the us of the world, but I think the NFL probably is higher on Travis Burke. I don't love what the Cardinals have done so far. I'll be real with you, Mr. C. D Kit should be over the moon. D Kit should really be over the moon. Ooh, yeah. Like that's like the one area that they could stand to address on the defensive side of the ball. I like that pick. Browns are having a good draft. Browns are doing a good job in this draft, and that's with me not being the biggest of Fano fan, in terms of this process. So yeah, I think the Browns are making good use of all of their draft capital. McNeil Warren lasted entirely too long, man. I don't know. I wonder if there's something that something else in the pre-draft process that kind of came up, that may not have necessarily permeated the mainstream media. But yeah, you talk about playmakers, in an already very talented defense. That's a good addition, and that was one of the areas that I thought they could address. Safety, big nickel type, um, guy that plays. I know Delpit is in that role, but will Delpit be there beyond 2026? Yeah, I think he's too good of a player. Yeah, pretty good trade too. I'm not sure what San Francisco's doing. I'm not sure what they're doing. They could have used Emmanuel McNeil Warren, honestly. So I'm not sure what San Francisco's playing at. Houston right back on the clock. So they drafted Reynolds in the first, followed up with McDonald, which is almost cheating, right? He's just going to allow whomever's at the second level to flow toe to toe, whomever's there. And of course they got those dastardly edges in a hell of a secondary. It's another team that I thought they get an Emmanuel McNeil Warren. That's almost unfair considering how good they are on the back end. This would be another good spot for Jamal McCoy because Kamari Lashner might not be back beyond this year. He might be too expensive. You got to extend Stingley. You just extended Will Anderson. He may be too rich for your blood. So do you go get his replacement at this point? Don't have to rush him. Don't have to rush him on the field. You know. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. I thought that was a bit of a reach. See what the Texans got going on. Okay, Marlon Klein. A tight end is an area that they needed to address. I'll be honest with you. I didn't do a lot of work on the tight end class. It was time constraints. What helped me with the evaluation of the tight ends is obviously seeing quite a few of them in Mobile. And there's some solid players. There's some solid players. I thought Max Clare probably would be one of the first few tight ends selected. Klein just hasn't played a lot, hasn't had a lot of opportunity. I should say maybe that playing not playing a lot is not the right word, but certainly a right phrase. Certainly not a lot of opportunity in the passing game. The Texans needed to address the tight end room, so they do so. Again, I think better football players on the board though. Okay, I like it, Tennessee. I like it. Chris Bell is still falling. Chris Bell is still falling. Go get him. Go help out Cam. If there's an offensive lineman that you like right here, go get him. You know, they got aggressive there at the bottom of the first. Moved up for Keldrick Falk, who I think in this scheme will be good early downs. He can play the edge, and then obvious passing situations. Reduce him down. Put him next to Jeffrey Simmons, John Franklin Myers, and let's get to it. Um, Carnell Tate was a lot of people's receivers one. I'm not convinced he's going to be a high end one. I think best case scenario, low end one in my mind. In my mind, be way off base. I've been wrong before, but this is how I feel about it. But I get it. I understand the notion of doing what you must in order to help your young quarterback. Um, I think offensive line or go back to the receiving well make sense here for Tennessee. And you can see lots of trades, lots of, five, move up five, 3, 4, 5 picks in order to ensure I get my guy in this class. A little bit of a commercial break. Yeah. I in the grand scheme of things, getting the guard, I'm okay with. Do I think they should have done? They should have made that decision there. Not necessarily, but he may not have been there for them. In the top parts of the second round. So I'm okay with that. Right? That's about C.J. Stroud. Um, K. McDonald makes a ton of sense. You got a need in terms of the interior defensive line, and he's the type of player that makes everybody better. Right? Now, you already have a really impressive defense. It just got that much better. I don't understand the tight end just yet. I don't, especially considering all of the draft capital they had. Albeit they've made some trades. They've made some trades. So you know, player that they probably felt strongly about. They are. They are. I feel like there's some reaches among these tight ends, right? But it goes back to the whole the notion that the tight end position is just so much utility with it, right? They put so much on the tight end's plate and they have so much responsibility. You need four tight ends. In this modern era of football, teams typically aren't carrying a fullback, right? So, you're a lead blocker, your personal protection and special teams, you're in line, you're a receiver. You play a ton of different roles. So I understand why teams perhaps um prioritize the tight end positions in the second round. You've seen this over the years now. It's a trend now, but I just think there's a lot of really good football players that are being passed up in favor of the tight ends right now. So I don't necessarily agree with it, but I think I understand it at least. Yeah, this would be a good spot for Chris Bell. This would be a good spot for Chris Bell. I know Tennessee has invested a lot of draft capital between last year and this year in terms of the receiving room, right? So it was DK, it was Io Manor last year, day three. Of course, you used the fourth overall pick on Carnell Tate. Um, I wouldn't stop because I think Calvin Ridley is on his last legs, honestly. Maybe he bounces back, but he just didn't look good last year. Um, I also think you need to protect Cam. So if there's a guard, a Pregnon, perhaps, or a tackle you like, a Markel Bell, at this point, I think I would consider adding one of those guys. And this is the guy right here, Jeff Simmons, man. I think you put Falk's locker room right between John Franklin Myers and Anthony Hill Johnson. I didn't see it coming, but I like it. I like it. They could stand to improve the second level of their defense, right? And he's the exact type of linebacker that Robert Saleh wants, right? You playing that either man front, you got to go sideline to sideline. You got to go. You think Dre Greenlaw, think Frank Frank Warner being obviously the cream of the crop, but certainly Dre Greenlaw, um, the ability to cover to cover space, um, the foot speed. This pick makes a lot of sense. I do think they needed to address the second level of the defense. I'm just thinking through the prism of take care of Cam, but last two selections. Last two selections on the defensive side of the ball, front seven picks for Tennessee. They're going to ensure that that's a position, or at least that part of their team is a strength. Yeah, and they were busy. They traded for Jermaine Johnson. They brought in Franklin Myers, as I mentioned. Signed Alante Taylor. You did pay a pretty penny for Wandell Robinson. So clearly Brian Dable influenced that. So you got your slot guy. You brought in Tate. He's going to play your X, your Z. You still have Ridley, Io Manor, DK, whom impressed last year. Gunnar Helm. You expect him to take a step. So maybe they like the current battery of young options in the passing game here. Um, the Rams, I mentioned it earlier, just kind of in passing. I didn't love the Ty Simpson selection. I didn't. I get the vision, I suppose, but I didn't love it. I think they need to address the receiving room. Tavon Austin, okay. I think they need to address the receiving room, right? Adams and Puka aren't under contract beyond this year. Max Clare. Now, now I don't understand this. I don't understand this. As much as I talked about the utility of the tight end position, I don't understand this decision. You got about four tight ends already, right? You re-up with Parkinson, if I'm not mistaken. I get it. They run 13 personnel. They'll run three tight ends out there at you, but you drafted Ferguson in the second round last year. Now you follow up with Claire again. Why re-up with Claire? I think Allen is still there. Like you can't get them all on the field. You know what I mean? This is a head scratcher. Albeit, I'm not taking anything away from this player. I think Max Clare is a really good player, and he's one of those that are complete. Right? He can play inline. He can catch the football. He can do all of the things. So they're getting a good football player, but it just you know, seems like somebody's getting buried in that tight end room. It may be Ferguson, although he started to kind of flash a little bit as he got, more opportunities as a season went along. I'm scratching my head a little bit on that one. Scratching my head a little bit on that one. Maybe there's a blind spot in terms of some of the contract situations there, but yeah. Okay. Bill's getting aggressive here. I'm going to take a quick break as we go to a pseudo commercial, so I will be right back. All right, let's get a look at what Buffalo does here. I think they can go in a number of directions. Actually, I wouldn't rest on my laurels with respect to the DJ Moore trade. I think that their inability to push the football down the field with any consistency um, probably is an area you can still address. So if you're a big Ted Hurst fan, he might be in play. Certainly Chris Bell, albeit he does a lot of damage just on drag routes because of his running the catch ability. Um, you got Antonio Williams, perhaps, you already have a player kind of like that in the slot already. So there's a few names. There's a few names at receiver that I would consider. Just being able to stretch opposing defenses, don't let them squat so much vertically. On the defensive side of the ball, I like linebacker, albeit several have come off the board here. Not sure who comes to mind immediately. There's been a pretty good run there at that position in round two, which we anticipated. Um, Maybe someone to play alongside Cole Bishop in the secondary at safety, someone who can kind of moonlight between safety Kilgore, Mrs. C. They go corner. So they go to the secondary and Davison Igbinosun. Okay. Um, I thought Igbinosun would probably come off the board around this time towards the back end of the second round, just because he has all of the physical tools, right? He has great size, length. He has the requisite foot speed. He's physical. He's experienced. He's played in a lot of big games. The thing about Igbinosun, though, and this is really the main detractor, probably why he's not a first round pick, right, or early day two pick. Um, Early second round selection, I should say, is at the moment of truth, right? And by the moment of truth, it's when the receiver, defensive back are expected to find and make a play on the football, right? So Igmanosin has a tendency to not actually find the football, look, turn, position himself, get into the body of the receiver, and find the football. Instead, he kind of tries to play through the receiver's hands, doesn't want to necessarily fall out of phase by looking for the football. And I don't the best defensive backs find the football. The best corners in the league are capable of finding the football. Yes, there may be certain instances where they just have to fight through the hands of the receiver. They're beat, they're out of phase. But when you're in phase, you absolutely need to be able to, adjust, locate the ball, make a play on the football. And what happens as a result of his inability or unwillingness to do so is that he gets handsy. He fouls, right? It ends up in holding calls and interference calls and so on and so forth. So it's something that I don't know that he's ever going to clean up completely, but there's enough ability and physical tools there to certainly take a swing on him. So the pick makes sense. Pick makes sense. Again, very experienced corner. He's played a lot of meaningful football. Went out to be Mobile, competed there. It wasn't all perfect, but I thought he did a pretty good job. So solidified his second round billing. See what the Chargers do here. Chargers traded down a bit earlier. I think Chargers went with my guy Mesidor, which makes a ton of sense, right? They basically had Thule, they lose Owe. They had Thule and they had an older Khalil Mack. Right? Those were your starting edges. So Mesidor makes sense. Right? Mesidor is ready to go. He's an older prospect. He's ready to go though, right? I think he's gonna be a difference maker. Um, they have some placeholders at guard, but I think they need to improve it. I think Pregnon makes a ton of sense here, and that wide outside zone, with Mike McDaniel moving over from as head coach of the Dolphins, his running game seems to be very potent. Regardless of what else is happening with his team, they could run the football. But you're looking for the right types of players, the right schematic fits. I think this is a Pregnon pick. Honestly, this should be, put it that way. This should be a Pregnon pick. The only other thing that I would suggest, perhaps, is a nose of some sort. Move Jamari Caldwell to the 4I5 spot. If there's a player like that, a big citrus or something like that. But I like Pregnon. I think he makes the most sense right here. Let's see. Jake Slaughter. Okay. So along the same lines, right? They brought in Tyler Biotish. Bring in Tyler Biotish. He's going to play center for you. How long? What the long-term solution is there? I'm not sure, but certainly in 2026, Biotish makes sense to be your starting pivot. Slaughter played center at UF. Very, very experienced player. I think he's 5 year senior. Really good football player. Really good football player. I think where he's being picked makes sense. Right on that bend, that second to third round bend. But he can also play guard. He took those snaps at the Senior Bowl. He's capable of playing guard. I think he has the functional strength to hold up one on one in those situations. Whereas center, you deal with the nose, but typically, there's double teams and so on and so forth. I think Slaughter gives you a certain level of flexibility in that offensive line. Again, I'm a little taken aback, a little surprised it wasn't Pregnon because he just seems like such a perfect fit for the scheme. But Slaughter's a good football player, and he gives you flexibility at both center and guard. Kilgore Pregnon, hey man, listen, you in the catbird seat. You in the catbird seat. Like you got to make the pick. You can't trade out. You got to make the pick. Pick is in. All right. The way this board is falling, you know, it's working out rather well. And like you said, if you go Pregnon here, let's say Seattle went with Pregnon 32nd overall and then followed it up with Jabari Price. Nobody would bat an eyelash. So, the net of it all works out. You know what I'm saying? It just has a tendency to work out that way sometimes. It reminds me of when the Lions selected Jack Campbell in the first and Brian Branch in the second. I would have taken Brian Branch 10 out of 10 times in the first, but because the safety position, in that case, nickel as well, is devalued, they managed to get Campbell as well as Branch. So that's why they do the team consensus boards as well. That's why you have to do that work around it as well, to get a sense of when you can take certain players to maximize value across the board. Okay, final selection here in the second round be Mississippi's defending champs, the Seattle Seahawks. And then we'll turn our attention to round three, which, again, still a lot of good football players out there, right? Guys who may not necessarily check all the boxes as it relates to measurables, or perhaps they have the measurables and they need to clean up the technique, but lots of upside remains in day two of this draft going into round three. And just as an aside, you see the QR code up in the right hand corner of your screen, perhaps. If you're watching on the TV, man, multitask. Check out our sponsor there, where you're artificial. Check out what they have. I know there's some new items coming out soon, man. But especially certainly for those of you who have the West Indian Caribbean background, there's quite a bit of merchandise featuring them. Any kind of motivational type of stuff, religious stuff. There's a pretty much something for everyone there at Where You're Artificial. So be sure to check that out. Just scan the QR code there in the top right. All right, pick us in, Mr. C. What we doing? What we doing? Could it be edge? Could you go edge here potentially? Deny Dennis Sutton maybe. Throw him in, or you get your guy Chris Bell. Get your guy Chris Bell right here, Mr. C. You wanted that bigger, speed type receiver, vertical type receiver. Albeit, like I said, he does a ton of damage on crossing routes, shallow crosses at that, and just runs away from everybody. But I know throughout the process you had mentioned Chris Bell, perhaps. He's there. He's readily available. Oh, that's my guy, Cliff Averill, man. That's my guy right there. It was a good Seahawk for you there in the 2010s. See what they do here. They got a lot of good options, that's for sure. And this is a team entering the draft with just four selections, but because of the way the board is falling, they're just making the selection. Oh, I love it. I should have said it. I thought about it. Mr. C, but I should have said it. That's the guy right there. As much as I like Kilgore, give me Bud Clark. That's the guy, bro. That's the one. I try to tell people, man, Bud Clark is the real deal in front of Halsey. Picked before Halsey. Keep trying to tell people Bud Clark is the real deal. That's a man. Listen, Seattle gonna be a problem. Mr. C. That's that man. You hating on that man age, man. Bud Clark is the real deal, my friend. I think you got to understand with Kilgore. Kilgore is a nickel. Kilgore does not play safety. Is he capable of playing safety? Perhaps. But we're talking 95, 96% of his snaps are in the slot. Bud Clark is the safety. He does it all. He can play your nickel, he'll play single high, he'll split safety look. I know he's just a little advanced in age, man. But that to me just means he's ready to go immediately. There's no there's no warming up to it, right? Just drop him in and go. I love the pick. I didn't say it. I didn't say it, but I thought about it. I thought about it. If you're gonna go safety, there isn't a more complete safety available at this point than Bud Clark in this class. You have some good players. They have certain strengths, albeit a la Kilgore, Kamari Ramsey, Zakee Wheatley. Like these guys have some strengths, but as far as complete, making plays on the football, tackling the whole nine, Bud Clark checks all the boxes. Just an older prospect. Oh, yeah. The Bo Kircher, I got a chance to see him in Mobile. Big, huge body. I didn't see anything special, right? And you don't always get the full gamut, particularly when it comes to tight ends. Even playing in season, you don't always see tight ends in their full glory. So there's a bit of a projection there. There's definitely a bit of a projection there, especially with Klein. Yeah, yeah. You're not alone in that. I'm sure. I'm sure you're not alone in that. All right. Interested to see what Arizona does here, right? I think their draft has been interesting to this point. Interesting. Again, I wonder, as you guys asked, what do you do with Basantis? Do you leave him at guard? You kick him out the tackle? You clearly have a need at right tackle. And you need pass rush. You need pass rush. So is this a pass rusher right here? I think they also need a nose, a big citrus type. Um, you know, you got a few of those guys that are going to be available even on day three. You start to get kind of deeper into it. There's some players that can run the 4-I-5 technique. Nick Barrett's of the world can ball. I like my guy from Missouri. His name's escaping me. He's another good one. Michigan too. Again, those names are escaping me right at the moment, but I wouldn't be surprised to hear some of those names here in the third round. See what they do here. Again, as I mentioned, there's still a lot of talent on the board. I just it's just been the Jeremiah Love thing. Clearly, there was smoke around that, right? And they decided, you know what, we're going to go with the best offensive player. We need to be able to score points. Particularly during the regular season, you got to be able to score points. But their inability to affect the passer is a glaring issue, and to come out of the first two rounds without addressing that isn't ideal. It isn't ideal, but you know, perhaps they're thinking, especially new coaching staff, like we're not going to be able to fix it all in one off season. So let's see what they follow up with here. Excuse me while I take a sip of water. I haven't talked this much in the last several days. We got here. Get us started here in round three of the 2026 draft. Okay, James Conner. You got to respect Conner, man. Been through so much, coming off another significant injury. Oh my goodness. What are the Cardinals doing? What are the Cardinals doing? All right. Bear with me a second. I gotta ask somebody else other than this audience what the Cardinals are doing. Listen, I there will be no Carson Beck slander, but I'm gonna call it what it is. There will be no Carson Beck slander, right? He was the trigger man to the best season Miami has had in 20 years, right? So there will be no slander. But I am a realist. I'm a realist. Since Beck had that injury, since he had that injury, he doesn't have the RPMs, right? He doesn't push the football down the field like he once did. Um, the arm talent, albeit the decision making, which is still questionable to this point. The arm talent was the redeeming quality, right? The Georgia version of Carson Beck, that was the redeeming quality. The injury usurped a lot of that, man. It really did. It really did. And I get it. I get it, right? You got Jacoby Brissett, who had, a career year last year, right? The offense actually showed life with Jacoby Brissett under center. He's in mid 30s, so he's still got plenty of football in him, mid to early 30s. Plenty of football still in him, but maybe not your long time answer. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So okay, it didn't work out with the third overall pick to be able to trade down, perhaps add a first round next year where you're expecting a better quarterback class. These things happen. These things happen. But again, unless you're telling me Chase Basantis is playing right tackle, you haven't addressed that, right? Offensive line being the most important position group. You come away empty handed, it seems, through the first 2 days of the draft in terms of addressing a pass rush that didn't exist last year. I think they were bottom three in the league in terms of pass rush, and they've added nothing of consequence via free agency. So I don't know what Arizona is doing. I don't know what the plan is here. I'm not going to debate Nussmeier. Nussmeier is as mistake prone as anyone, right? I just worry about Beck's long-term ability to push the football down the field. Like and maybe another year further removed from the Tommy John surgery, and he gets some of that elasticity back and is able to push the football down the field. This is a player here, Tyler Onyedem, that I'm not as familiar with, but I've heard a lot about as of late. I did not spend a lot of time on him, but in terms of attacking three techniques, he seems to be one of the favorites among the NFL. So clearly, a player that Denver was targeting here. I like my guy Grayson Halton, but I think folks like this fella's upside a bit more. Going back to the Cardinals, I just but you're not bringing him back to start, right? I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. Even prior to the injury, I'm not convinced that Beck was going to be a starter level quarterback at the end. You know what I mean, at the NFL level because of his decision making and some of the accuracy issues he had. Right. So it just seems to me like the Cardinals are struggling a little bit. Yeah, yeah. You got the third overall pick. Jeremiah Love was sitting there, best offensive player. Okay, right? It's hard to mess that up. It's hard to mess that up. But um, this hinges a lot on what the plan is with Besantis, and certainly I don't like the start to the third round here with the back pick. I think you got better football players at different positions on a team with a lot of needs, lots of needs, right? Oh, that said, shout out Beck, man, what he did for Miami. Keon Crawford is a intriguing prospect. You talk about those edges. He's going to stand up. That's what he does. He's relatively new to football. He hasn't been playing football very long, just for a handful of years. But he has some traits. He has some ability. Really, my first exposure to him was in Mobile, and I saw some quality flashes. I could see why there's intrigue there. But he's still learning the game. He's still very much learning the game. I think it's a nice depth addition to the Raiders, albeit there may be another player or two that I may have had it's a bit higher. But again, you talk about the size, the frame that he can still grow into. I certainly understand the decision there. Who knows what happens long term? You know, who knows what happens long term? In terms of that group of edges. Of course, they tried to make the trade previously, didn't work out with Baltimore, or Baltimore decided, I don't have to give away my first round pick in order to make this happen, get a Trey Hendrickson. So, I know we're not sure what's going to happen with Crosby. I think best case scenario they keep him. I know he doesn't want to be part of another rebuild, but best case scenario they keep him. All right, Howie's back at it. Howie is back at it. Are we going to commercial? Yes, we are. Okay. All right. I'm going to step away for a moment, folks. I will be back. Okay. Look at that. Brian Westbrook making the pick. Oh, he was a problem. Boy, Brian Westbrook was a problem. Jeez. My goodness. Boy. How he's nailing this thing, man. Markel Bell. He's nailing this thing. Lane Johnson is coming to the end there, obviously dealing with injuries. Um, Long term, what happens with Mailata? Is he playing up to the level of the contract? I thought Markel Bell had an outside chance to slip into the second round. I knew for a fact that he'd come off the the board here in the third. Um, yeah, yeah. The Eagles are nailing this thing. You throw in Grenard with that trade, they'll be right back in the thick of things. They'll actually get some decent play calling this year, I think, in terms of the offensive side of the ball. They've addressed all of their primary concerns. I think maybe a safety is in order at this point. Reed Blankenship went to Houston. Of course, you got Makuba back there, but they could probably need a running mate for Makuba. But yeah, man, I think Howie is among he's certainly one of the best. He's certainly one of the best GMs in the league. That front office is it does a terrific job. This should be a pass rusher of some sort, whether it be the interior or the edge. The last selection of Logan Jones here for the Bears took me by surprise a little bit. Albeit, is that Peanut? Albeit, they needed to address center. Certainly, I understand it from that perspective. But again, just how the board kind of all falls out. No, that's not Peanut. I think that's just a fan, if I'm not mistaken. I don't have any volume here on my feed of the draft. I don't wanna mix things up. Who's oh, he's Illuminati. That's funny. Oh, Mr. C, you right. They selling out. They selling out. This, the Rams are right there, but they act like they're not right there. They act like they need a sixth tight end. Well, they've drafted no one that's going to help them this upcoming season. At least I don't think. The little man making the pick. Another tight end. And I know there's a big hive for Sam Roush. Big hive. Um, and oh man. I mean, you got Loveland, obviously. Komet is still there. Are you moving off of Komet? I know probably beyond 2026, sure, and Komet would be out. So but I guess maybe I look at it through the prism of that there's some quality depth in terms of like interior pass rushers. It's thinning out as far as edges are concerned, especially guys who can put their hand in the ground, right? It's thinning out a bit there, but there are quite a few good interior pass rushers, and the big body, two gapping nose types as well. So maybe that's the prism that they're looking through, but um, everybody making sure that they get their tight end now. That seems to be the focus here as we move further and further in and through day two of the 2026 NFL draft. All right, Mr. C, the Niners are up on the clock. Let's see if they find someone who can hold up against Byron Murphy. See, let's see if they can add a piece here to help out with respect to that. Byron Murphy gives the Niners fans nightmares. They talk about him all the time. Like we need someone to counter that. Andy Lee. Okay. Romello Height. Okay. Height to me is not a hand in the ground player, right? He to me he's a stand up edge rusher. He's gonna play that Leo role. Older prospect, but this is about where he should go. And the Niners need someone other than Nick Bosa to get after the quarterback. Of course, Bosa's coming off the injury. I like some of the young players there in the interior. I'm a big Alfred Collins fan. Big Alfred Collins fan. Markel Williams, they took him in the top 10. You're hoping, you're hoping he develops into a better pass rusher, right? He's clearly very good run defender, but he dealt with injuries there at Georgia. He didn't really get an opportunity to truly develop as a pass rusher. So it'll be interesting to see if they can kind of unlock him in that regard. Even if it requires him to kind of reduce down and rush from the interior on obvious passing situation. You need more out of him. You can't take a guy that plays on the edge, right? Particularly in an even man front. Um, the top 10, I think it was ninth overall a season ago, and he can't get to the passer, right? And like I said, from a film evaluation perspective, it was clear that that was an area of his game that he struggled with, right? In certain instances, you were just too strong for the opposition, but there wasn't, a great get off. There wasn't elite hand usage, albeit very long arms and heavy hands. The technique wasn't necessarily there. The savvy wasn't necessarily there. So, um, understandable that they'd want to help add more bodies to the pass rush rotation, but I don't know that he's an ideal fit. At the end of the day, that doesn't matter though. It's about getting after the quarterback. Still nobody to block Byron Murphy though. So I'm again less about the player. I'm not a huge fan of what San Francisco has done to this point. Lots of trade downs. Clearly, they're fans of the depth of this draft. So we'll see how they continue to work at it. Commanders making their second pick of the draft, so they had no second round selection. Of course, they took Sonny Styles in the first. I had them pegged for Caleb Downs. I actually thought they would go with Caleb Downs, but they kind of working front to back a little bit with the Styles pick, and I get it. I get it. You brought in Leo Chenal. You do have McGee there, but none of those guys move the needle quite like Sonny Styles does. So I understand that. I thought this team might be in the market for a Grenard, right? I thought, considering the fact that they didn't have a second round pick, maybe they just bail, maybe just bail on day two, use the third round pick, bring in Grenard. But the Eagles clearly already had that because that had been reported previously. So the Eagles clearly had that already worked out. See what the Commanders do here. See if they go back to the defensive side of the ball, or maybe add a receiver, right? It's they were with Scary Terry hurt, they were relying on Traylon Burks off the free agent heap. Although good for Burks, he earned himself a little contract. He's obviously struggled with injury quite a bit. Maybe there must be something to it. I fully expect him to be picked here though, before the night's out. But yeah, definitely far further down the board that excuse me than I had anticipated. Mhm. Little commercial. So yeah. I want to encourage those who have been watching and have popped in and out to stick around a little bit later tonight. I'm going to do a joint stream with Jake, friend of the show. Obviously, did a mock draft earlier this week with him. The Draftmas Eve, the annual Draftmas Eve mock draft. We're going to do a recap. We're going to recap day two, give kind of a succinct thoughts in terms of what has taken place. There's been some teams that have really nailed it. Teams have just kind of carried their momentum from day one into day two. And then I think there's been a few teams here who have kind of mailed it in a little bit. Like I'm not impressed. Um, yeah, again, I thought Sam Heck was going to be in the third. Um, Brockemeyer probably will fall to day three because I like Brockemeyer a lot. Like I like the strain from Brockemeyer, right? But he's small. He's a little undersized. So for that reason, not because of a lack of technique or anything like that, I think he works his way into day three. But I think he's a solid player. I agree with you. Um, yeah, yeah. He helped himself, and then he had a strong showing in Mobile too. Brockemeyer, that is, as did Sam Heck. So we'll hear their names. We'll hear their names. Heck, I think tonight, and then Brockemeyer fairly early tomorrow. Speaking of which, I still owe the folks that checked out that Senior Bowl all first and second team video out my notes. I'll be sure to get those up on Patreon at some point here, especially as we recap things and take a look at the various draft classes in depth. As much as I want to turn the page to 2027, I want to finish out 2026 better than I entered it and left it over the course of the balance of the cycle. So finish strong, and then we'll turn the page to 2027 and really put our foot on the gas pedal on the accelerator. See what the Commanders do here. Could use a DB too. Maybe a nickel or a boundary guy if you want to move Sanders still back into the nickel. Yeah, they can go a number of different directions here. A lot of talking, chap. I can't hear what you're saying, but a lot of talking. Make the pick. We got things to do. Man, still talking. Antonio Williams. So I mentioned it. I mentioned it, right? You had a number of injuries at the receiving position. Now, this is interesting to me because Antonio Williams was a very good football player. But for his injury history, which is fairly extensive, he probably is off the board in the first 50 selections, right? And listen, he's very much in the same conversation. He's very much in the same conversation. He just has those injuries, right? I think they are very similar, actually, right? I agree with you. I agree with you. I think it's the out of sight, out of mind to a certain degree because Williams has had some injuries over the last several seasons that have robbed him of a lot of opportunities. He was the focal point of their passing game, but he just struggled to stay healthy. But I find it interesting because clearly there is concern about Chris Bell injury, right? If you're willing to go with Antonio Williams, albeit like I said, a very very good player, very polished player, but he has a lengthy history. He's missed a lot of football. Um, to then say, we prefer Antonio Williams to Chris Bell. Again, different body types, different types of receivers. I don't hate it from a talent standpoint, but I think it speaks to the fact that there are concerns about Bell. There's your guy right there, Mr. C. Tacario Davis. You know, he and Ephesians Presock, obviously skyscrapers at corner, they underachieved in my opinion. I think they underachieved. I think what this would mean, though, my assumption with this pick is perhaps Dax Hill moves back inside to the nickel. I don't think DJ Turner can play in the nickel because he's not physical enough. He actually had his best season last year in coverage, but he can't tackle. So can't put him inside, albeit him being smaller, right? They tend it's weird, right? You need to have a certain level of physicality to play the nickel at a high level, but they tend to force the smaller players into playing inside the numbers as opposed to on the boundary. But Takario, to me, he just didn't live up to expectations. He just didn't live up to expectations. He given his physical attributes, you would think he'd be more dominant. And he wasn't dominant. Okay, let's see what the Saints might be up to here. They went with Jordan Tyson, who's my receiver one in this class. Again, injuries, so I can understand the hesitation there. And then I believe they got Kristen Miller, who's one of my favorites at any position in this class. So I really like what they've done thus far. See what they do here. I could see them going back to corner. They could be in the market for the tight end. I'm just going to say it. There it is, Oscar Delp. Because it's Jawan Johnson, and I think really nothing behind him. Although they brought in Noah Fant, but it's Noah Fant. So Oscar Delp was a really interesting, not watch for me, but the conversation I thought around Oscar Delp was really interesting, right? They talked about, he was supposed to be the guy, right? He transfers in from, I believe, Stanford. He's supposed to be the guy. and it just never truly materialized, right? And they were there were some lofty expectations, like this is Bowers, not 2.0, but you should have kind of the Bowers type of impact, and it, like I said, never materialized. Um, I think there's a belief that he's capable enough in line and could be a difference maker in the passing game. So this tight end selection here in the third round, the upside that Delp kind of represents, it makes sense to me, right? You're trying to help your quarterback out there and Shuck. Again, you don't have much behind Jawan Johnson, the utility of the position. I get it at this point. I don't understand the Rams taking a fifth, sixth tight end now. But certainly this one seems to make a little bit more sense to me. That's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah. Davis is the better player than Presok, but I think both of them underperformed. Okay. You mentioned Mr. C, you mentioned D Kid. I'm sure he's over the moon. I'm gonna have to reach out to him and get his thoughts because you come away with Reese, Maui Noah, Colton Hood, and now you go get a big citrus right here, right? Right? To help, they went to the receiving room, which what was gonna happen at some point. You know what's gonna happen at some point? This is an interesting one. This is an interesting one. I think Malachi Fields really helped himself a lot at Mobile, right? And that size, those hands, um so the draft feels over Hurts is no. I'm telling you, man, Hurst doesn't play with I think the physicality you want to see. Um but I also understand because Hurst has a ton of upside, ton of ability, ton of upside. He's everyone's favorite non-power four player, group of five player. He's everybody's favorite group of five player. So I understand it from that perspective. But I think when you talk about blocking, being physical at the catch point, right? Not alligator arming it over the middle, that type of thing. I think that's where you might see a Malachi Fields ahead of Hurst. But I understand the overall skill set, the ability to create separation, the ability to win at every level of the field, really, with Hurst is superior to Fields. I agree with you there. Fields had a big time performance in Mobile, though. He had a better performance than Hurst in Mobile, and I think the Golden Dome probably has something to do with it too. I think that probably has something to do with it too. So, Giants get their receiver. I'm gonna tell you what's a note for me. Fields over Chris Bell. I'm gonna tell you that's a no for me. But again, I'm probably beating a dead horse at this point. It's clear that there's concerns about that injury. And I think I think in terms of on the field, Bell didn't run a full route tree, so, and that's fair. That's a fair knock on him as well. All right, Dolphins, come on now, clean it up. It's not that I don't like the players, the last couple of selections, but you know, I don't think it'd be the way I would approach to rebuilding this thing. Jacob Rodriguez is a dog though, and Chris Johnson is very talented. The wild card, the primary wild card is Proctor, right? That's a bet. That's a bet. All right. Let's step away for a quick second here. I'll be right back with you guys. All right, we're back. It's funny you mentioned Skylar Bell because I think he'd be a good addition for the Dolphins. I'm not sure if you've seen that the Finns receiving room. It leaves a lot to be desired, to say the least. I think the Dolphins have three third round selections, unless they use some draft capital to move up there in the bottom of the first. I do believe they have three picks here in the third, so they'll be busy. They'll be busy. They just got to do a better job with the picks. I think the last two are fine. Corner clearly a significant need. They got the guys they considered the second best corner in the class. Can't knock that. Jacob Rodriguez is a credible playmaker at the second level of the defense. That to me signals, you're not resting on your laurels, right? They got Dodson, they got the former Seahawk, or the both former Seahawks actually. The tackle machines, they got the tackle machines at the second level, but those guys weren't necessarily making plays on the football, creating offense via defense, right? So I'm okay with that. And then you think about long term contracts, things of that nature. So I'm okay with that. The Proctor decision over both Thumbs and Baines, I'm gonna scratch my head. I'm gonna continue to scratch my head on that one. Let's see what they do here. You mentioned Skylar Bell, Chris Bell, Caleb. Ooh, that's a lot earlier than I expected. Caleb Douglas. This is a lot earlier than I expected. Caleb Douglas. I got a chance to watch him and his teammate out at Mobile, and they're good players. They're good players. I just didn't expect them this early, honestly. Um, we'll see. We'll see how he fits into what they do. I'm sure they like the height, the size. That front office has a penchant for size. Um, but yeah, I'm a little surprised as how early he came off the board. I'm a little surprised by that. I thought he was more of a early day three candidate. I know that's how I feel about it. I think Virgil is better than Douglas. I do think Virgil he's his release package is better than Douglas, right? Douglas has a more prototypical frame. And you know anything about this new front office here in Miami, as they say Packers South, they like size. That's the whole thing behind Proctor is, he physically imposing size. But yeah, I think Douglas is solid, but I also agree Virgil is better, and I had them both in day three. Okay, Pittsburgh. What say you? It's probably time for another tight end, right? I think Pittsburgh is supposed to be fairly busy. I know they did move up though. I forget what it cost them, but they did move up in the second round. Learn from what happened on day one of the draft. Oh yeah, got to play it up. Hope City. Joey Porter and who was that? Oh, it's Porter. That's Porter. That's Porter and Porter. There you go. I like it. I like it. Nice touch. Yeah, this one makes sense. This one makes sense. You know, he's the in-state prospect. I think we're having a different conversation about Drew Aller. I think he's already off the board if he plays the entire season. I'm not suggesting he's competing with Mendoza for the top pick overall, or even a first round pick for that matter. But I do think he had an opportunity to really help himself, and the injury was unfortunate. The injury was unfortunate. They finally put some decent weapons around him outside of Tyler Warren. They had the two backs, Singleton and Katron Allen. They had a quality offensive line. That team, this Penn State team, was designed to make a deep run. Right, they had a lot of guys come back from the previous year, previous playoff appearance. They came back to school, but the Trigger Man went down, so his stock obviously tumbled because of that. But I think it makes sense. I didn't think Howard was going to be the guy. I think Aller has more upside. We'll see. We'll see if he can develop into something. But this one makes sense to me. This one makes a little bit more sense than the Carson Beck pick, in my opinion. Right? I mean, assuming everything is mending correctly. It's just I watched every throw from Carson Beck this past season, and there clearly was anything beyond maybe 15 yards, the ball just did not have the RPM. It just did not move the way it needed to move. And maybe not. Maybe not. You might be right about that. You might be right about that. But I think given the draft capital that they have at this point in the draft, I think it makes sense. I think it's a reasonable decision. Whether it actually materializes into something is a completely different conversation. But um, they've had they've been right there. He's in their backyard, so they have all of the inside information. Of course, all of these organizations spend a lot of resources in order to really flesh out all the details associated with the players. But um, that proximity helps make that decision, I would imagine. Okay, Green Bay's on the clock. Bit of a, I won't say a head scratcher. I think Cisse certainly fits a need, um, but I'm not sure how Green Bay fans feel about Cisse because he has some work to do. The skills, physical tools are there, but he's got some refinement that he needs. Green Bay was a host city last year, if I'm not mistaken. Was that 2 years ago? At any rate, um, I'm sure the Packers fans have traveled to Pittsburgh. John Kuhn. I respect Kuhn. I respect fullbacks, man. Fullbacks are people too. Yeah. So this is one of the players that I was alluding to, right? As far as guys who can kind of get upfield and affect the passer. Chris McClellan had a really good season, underrated season, right? So you talk about Zion Young, you talk about Josiah Trotter. Last year the conversation was around like the Membos of the world and Luther Burden, whatever the case may be. But McClellan really took a nice leap this past season, and then I think he punctuated things in Mobile. He definitely flashed that ability to disrupt and get upfield, right, as a three tech one gap, as opposed to just kind of occupying space. Actually showing the ability to affect the passer from the interior. So I anticipated him going around this time of the draft. I thought on the strength of what he did this season and certainly during the Senior Bowl, it buoyed him from early day 3 into the day 2 conversation. Okay. Got the Colts making their second pick. And I'm telling you, if you checked out that video, my all first and second team video from the Senior Bowl, that there's not you're not gonna get more comprehensive coverage coming out of the Senior Bowl than you are on Couch Potato General Manager. You're not. You're not. I'm not the fastest to market, but as far as the depth and width in which evaluate that practice film, watch it live, and then go back and watch the film. Most folks aren't doing that. You get a lot of good information, and that information actually is evergreen. So feel free to revisit that particular video. That'll give you some insights. To Bud Clark, Mr. C. Bud Clark is that guy, man. I keep trying to tell you, don't feel no way. You can still go get Kilgore if you want to. You can still go get him. Appreciate you. Appreciate you, man. You can still get him if you want to, but Bud Clark is that guy. So what did Indianapolis do? They went with sound like Drew. They went with CJ Allen, which for my purposes, home run pick, right? Board, need, it all came together, and you get a legitimate green dot. That's going to be one of the smartest football players on the field. Um, which is the reason why he's able to make as many plays as he does, and put his teammates in position to make plays as well. See the QB. That they do. That they do. I don't, they were riding high there for about 8 weeks, and then the wheels came off. Um, I think they could use a Chris McClellan type of player up front next to Buckner. My guy's Grayson Halton. I'd like to see him come off the board here the next several picks. Um, yeah, he's a good one. I think on the offensive side of the ball, they gave Alec Pierce the big money. We'll see. We'll see if he lives up to the contract. Josh Downs. I'm missing somebody. I think they got one more player. I think they could probably stand to improve the receiving room. Um, what else? Offensive line. Is there a need in the interior? If there is, there's some good players out there. What else we got? Yeah, yeah. I'm leaning towards interior defensive line, right? You know, clean it up so CJ Allen can do his thing. And you can't have enough good defensive backs either. So let's see. Yeah, 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 yeah. Talked about him. He's a good one. He's a good one. He helped himself at Mobile for sure. And you go back and you check out his tape. He's one of those interior guys actually getting upfield, getting after the quarterback, getting the quarterback on the ground. You know, 'Cause McAfee, just make the pick, man. I know you like to hear your own voice, man, but just make the pick. Don't get me wrong. I think McAfee's funny, but it gets old after a while. What are we doing? This guy's doing magic tricks. Oh man, that's a good pick. Yeah, as I mentioned, you can't have enough good defensive backs. They could use some teeth in the secondary. Halsey's a good player. He finds the football, right? Particularly in the passing game, and I don't think there's a better safety in terms of being that robber. So kind of driving in the middle field. You can see here from his his highlight package here. He kind of patrols, not at depth necessarily, but you know what I'm saying. I think his ability to kind of react and see what's kind of developing in front of him and drive on the football and make it really difficult for quarterbacks to complete passes across the middle is impressive. So yeah, I like what the Colts are doing. They're building it right through the middle. And now they can just, day three, they can go and down to the down line and address the middle there. And that's typically how you build strength, right? And then you start, putting on the bells and whistles on the perimeter, but certainly build it through the middle. Jalen Green as a receiver one. It's a good spot for Chris Bell. Or Skylar Bell, or yeah, you got Ted Hurst there. Like, it's a good spot for some of these guys. Hey, well, Michael Turner really thinned out, man. I didn't even recognize him. Zachariah Brandt. So yeah, yeah, playmaker on the perimeter. Um, you keep him right there in the peach state. Yeah, he's explosive. He's electric. He's definitely an electric player. I think in terms of the type of player he is, that this makes a lot of sense. I think this particular selection, um, given that you have Kyle Pitts, you have Drake London, you already have those types of body types in the passing game. A twitched up Zachariah Branch who can take something short and go the distance. You'd like to see more of the full route tree, but it's just the way the Georgia used him, right? I guess the transfer didn't work as well as he had hoped. I know there was a lot of mouths to feed there at USC, um, and Deuce Robinson and Hudson ended up in Penn State. Branch ended up in Georgia, so a lot of guys cleared it. And Lemon obviously took full advantage of that. But the Georgia passing game was weird. It was a little weird. Like it clearly had a passing game, but some of the options within it just seemed to be pigeonholed into a very specific role. Um, I'd like to see again Branch used more at every level as opposed to just bubbles and jet sweeps and things of that nature. I think there's other ways to get him involved down the field a bit. Yeah, he's super sudden, man. I don't think he's had a better, well, statistically perhaps better, but his most impactful season was his true freshman year at USC. I think you just got to understand how to use him, but he's a great compliment, like I said, to London and Kyle Pitts. He's a very different type of player. Super sudden, super quick, lots of speed. Can help in the return game. The return game is now in vogue with the rule changes, so I think it's a good pick. I actually think it's a good pick for the Falcons. This is a good spot for Chris Bell. I'm pushing this Chris Bell thing because you just don't have a lot of these size speed combos, right? But I see that NFL organizations are shying away from the injuries. Jamar McCoy is still on the board. They're shying away from these injuries. They're just not interested in taking the risks. Ooh, Jacoby Lane. So they did go receiver. They did go receiver. And listen, man, I thought Jacoby Lane was going to put on a show this year. I know Drew, did a nice video on him leading up to the season. I thought Jacoby Lane was, especially as, like I said, the cupboard kind of cleared up in terms of all the mouths to feed, several transfers out. I thought it was just going to be him and Lemon. It just became the Lemon show. Lemon just took over. Lane is super talented, super talented. He has to get stronger. I watched a number of corners. One that I think will probably either be here at the very end of the third or be a day three pick. Malik Muhammad, corner from Texas, like just bully him. Igbinosun beat him up at the line of scrimmage. To be 6'4", I know he's not the biggest, but as far as weight is concerned, but to be 6'4" and to play as soft as he did, particularly in Mobile, but throughout the season because he underwhelmed, right? He dealt with injury, he underwhelmed. Is problematic, But the body control, the ability to track the football, it's there. There's talent there, but he has to play a lot. He got to be more physical player. It's not physical enough at this point. He's smooth. He's smooth with it. Like I said, great body control. He's got great hands. He makes some difficult grabs, right, in terms of contorting his body and so on and so forth. But at the line of scrimmage, if you can't get out into your route, your quarterback's going to get sacked, and they're just not going to even look that way. You're just going to be excommunicated from the progression. Let's see here. So I think the Jags' first selection was the tight end out of A&M. Um, They probably could have. Well, I won't say they could have gotten him here because they're not the only team that seems to be reaching for tight ends. But um, Paul Postlesny, okay, Albert Regis. There's another A&M guy. I think I was conflating the two tackles. This is the one that I've heard the most about recently. Um, it fits a need. It fits a need. So not mad at it. Not mad at it. A couple other players that I'm perhaps a little bit more familiar with, but certainly fits a need. They need more bodies. Devon Hamilton hasn't been playing good football. Like he gets kind of lost in translation a little bit, right? Because of some of the other players who broke out. Like Devin Lloyd had the breakout season, led to the big deal. The Jags figured it out offensively, started to put some crooked numbers up on the board. There's Walker, there's Allen, Alua Khan. There's some good players around there. So, not to say that Hamilton should have a bunch of counting stats because he plays the nose, but he's not playing at a high enough level. So, adding some bodies to the down line certainly makes sense. Yeah, Vikings up once again, or at least I know they had several day two picks, as does Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh will be back on the clock here shortly. And the Finns. The Finns have a ton of day three picks. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I hear you. I hear you on Lane. I hear you on Lane. There are people definitely who were out on Lane because, like you said, he underwhelmed. He underwhelmed this year, right? The situation was right for him to you know, ascend, and he didn't take advantage of that. And then you go to Mobile, and he was better in the 7-on-7 and the team portion, right? Interestingly enough, it was a little odd. He seemed to be a little bit more comfortable, or at least the DBs allowed him to be more comfortable because generally speaking, on one-on-ones, that you got a two-way go. There's no pass rush. Like the one-on-ones favor receivers, and for you to get beat up, within those first 5 yards in a one-on-one situation, man, that's tough. That's tough. But I could see the Ravens kind of, betting on some of that talent because there is talent there. All right, gonna step away for just a second here. Take advantage of this commercial, and I shall return. So it appears Caleb Banks was not enough mass up front for the Vikings, and they now add big citrus, Dominique Orange to the mix. I actually love it. I love it. They needed additional bodies. They've had some underperformers, aging veterans. It's time to get younger. It's time to kind of reimagine this thing, and of course they needed the cap relief as well. Jalen Redmond has been a real bright spot along that defensive line. You add Banks. If Banks can stay healthy on top of Orange Citrus, oh man, I like it. I like it. The Vikings have been a team that I've been kind of like, but they're clearly trying to stabilize that down line. It's been a bit of an eyesore here over the last couple seasons. Yeah, I'm looking at DJ's top players, and I'm agreeing with him for the most part here. See what Carolina does here. Jake Delhomme, Delhomme. Jake Delhomme don't get enough respect, man. Chris Brazel. Okay, so I thought the Panthers might add another receiver to the mix, right? And true vertical threat, right? Ted McMillan makes plays, all over the field. Coker is a very nice, secondary option, tertiary option. Um, Leggett just entirely too inconsistent, and I own that one because I was like, I understand. He had his breakout late in his career. He's dealt with a ton of injury. I'm a bet on the traits, right? I still think he's been more productive than Keon Coleman, and that was really where the conversation was. So I'll take a pseudo win there, but he hasn't played well enough. He hasn't played well enough, and so I think adding Brazel to the mix here to push him in terms of being the team's primary field stretcher is a good move. Okay, Bucks. Think about what the Bucks might need. I know interior of the offensive line, Pregnon makes sense here. I think Pregnon definitely makes sense here. Um, they lost Mike Evans, but they've invested fairly heavily in the receiving room. They may yet still go back there. I think they get their linebacker, right? They got Bain. Um, they got who was the next pick for the Bucks? I gotta confirm it. Josiah Trotter. So they got Trotter. They did get the linebacker. So I'll come off of the thought process that I had. I was thinking maybe Kyle Louis, albeit he's not. He probably not isn't. He probably isn't the best schematic fit. He's a smaller linebacker, more nickel than linebacker. He's such a good player though. He's such a good player. I know Levante David wasn't that big, but he played so much bigger, and he probably still another 15 pounds heavier than Kyle Louis. But I really like Kyle Louis. See if you can get him into a team that runs, a lot of nickel, um, even man fronts, keep him clean on the weak side, and then you can stay in base because of how effective he is in coverage. I likened it to when I watched him in Mobile. I likened it to Quinyon Mitchell's performance a couple seasons ago in Mobile. So I had not to that point, and for all the years I had been going to Mobile and studying the players and interviewing the players and watching those practices, I had never seen a corner that effective in one-on-ones, right? Just dominant, right? Because again, one-on-ones favor the receivers. Um, Louis in terms of coverage facing the tight ends and the running backs during those practices, he had that level of dominance, right? So perhaps he's not an every down player. That's why he's further down the board. But as a nickel defender when obvious passing situation, you go to your nickel package. I think he can help you a lot right out the gate. Um, and then perhaps over the course of an off season or two, get that weight up around 230. You know what I mean? Get it up around 230, and become an every down player. See what we got here with the Bucks. Yeah, so yeah, DJ has Kyle Louis at it's his 55th player, so third ranked player currently on the board. I don't think there's a dire need at corner, but they did lose Jamel Dean, Ben Mo, Benjamin Morrison, and Xylan McCullum are your top two guys on the boundary. You got Tyke Smith is going to play your nickel. Jacob Parrish slash Tyke Smith. Tyke Smith is a safety back there with Winfield. So got a nice young secondary, but wouldn't necessarily hurt to add a corner. I think they have bigger needs if you're looking at it through the prism of needs in the front seven of the defense, and then along the interior of the offensive line. So let's see what the Bucks do here. 84th overall. I'm almost approaching the end of day two. Gene Deckerhoff, that's the voice of the Bucks. The voice for FSU at one point. So I have respect for Deckerhoff, but I don't like him. You know what I mean? Size, size, and it seems like the nickels didn't come off the board like I was expecting. Teams are favoring the big slot. Well, you might see Kilgore come off the board before Abney. Good player though. Good player. There's your Ted Hurst pick. So there you go. Despite all of the draft capital that they've invested in receiver, you lose Mike Evans, the free agency. You had a couple seasons ago, they had a situation where they had like no warm bodies because of all of the injuries. And there you go with Ted Hurst. Like I said, there's a lot to like about Ted Hurst. I just want to see him be more physical in the middle of the field. And really at the Senior Bowl, that highlight there, that one-handed grab, that was it. That was it. When he was facing that competition, I think he struggled a bit. I think he struggled a bit. So the step up in competition, you may want to temper your expectations with Hurst out the gate. I think long term, I think he can be really good, but I think you want to temper some of those expectations because, again, like I said, when facing some upper or better competition, I should say, in Mobile, I thought he struggled. I thought it was an underwhelming performance. But he does go to a team where he's not going to be thrust into a ton of responsibility at the gate, so he'll have an opportunity to continue to develop, and then you could tap into that ability that he possessed. All right, Pittsburgh. I know there was some rumblings about Alex Highsmith maybe on the trade block, or Nick Herbig. I don't know why you would trade either one of them. If you plan on starting a 43, 44-year-old quarterback, like you need to have all your pieces to make a run at this thing. Um, they brought in Rico Dowdle to back up Jalen Warren with Gainwell heading to Tampa Bay. So, Tampa's going to be, I think Tampa has a good shot at bouncing back, right? They came up a little short there last season, inconsistent. They missed Bucky for a lot of that season. I think having him healthy, Gainwell helps to keep him healthy. I think offensively they should be pretty good shape. I would expect a tight end soon for the Bucks, like everybody else. A nickel makes sense here for the Steelers. I could see a nickel DB. I think they're moving Ramsey more to safety. Okay, they went with corner. Okay, which again they could potentially play Everett at the nickel or move somebody who's currently on the boundary inside. So That makes sense to me. I thought at some point they would add a corner. Mock drafts, I typically had Igbenogson going to Pittsburgh, so makes sense. He has good size. He's got good size, and the tape is up and down, but he saves his best as DJ's mentioning here. He saves his best for those games under the lights. That's when he seemingly plays his best football. So um, this is about the right spot for Dalen Everett. I would agree with where he's being picked relative to the board. And the thing about Everett is that while it's not perfect, while he's not an absolute lockdown, he seemingly has a very short memory, right? His confidence typically doesn't waver. There you go, Cleveland. Cleveland taking advantage of that draft capital, man. Get aggressive. Find your guy. Identify your guy. Go get him. You know what I mean? Don't hesitate. Who's the sister right here? Oh, that's Kimberly Fields. Okay. Okay. Austin Barber. So that makes sense from the perspective of you need depth, right? That there's some skill here, albeit he needs time to develop, right? And of course he's being picked in a spot where you're not expecting him to be thrust into any immediate duty, right? So Fano obviously comes in. You got Elgington Jenkins. Center's name is escaping me right now, but you also brought in Zion Johnson, and then the Titus Howard via trade. So I think you have your starting five. You bring in Barber because, of course, you've struggled mightily with injuries over the years. Haven't been able to start the same five for any period of time over the last several years. And then Dawan Jones is on the mend, but he has spent most of his career in the trainer's room. So he doesn't seem to factor into the long term plans of Cleveland, especially with this new coaching staff and what have you. So the depth, the fact that they narrowed in on him, and it looks like they gave up a pretty decent chunk of draft capital. I thought that was intriguing. But Barber has the movement skills. I think he has some good upside, but he doesn't have the functional strength necessary to play down in and down out. Right, I think best case scenario, he comes in as like the sixth offensive lineman from time to time, but you want to let him develop. Okay, Dolphins. Will Kazmarek. Will Kazmarek blocks. I tell you what, he blocks. I do not know what the Dolphins are doing. They had cleaned it up a little bit in there in the middle of some of those picks, and then they go with Will Kazmarek. So again, the only explanation, what I hang my hat on when it comes to all of these tight ends is again, you only have so many roster spots for game day, right? You only have so many. So you got to have guys who do lots of things. They got to play special teams, right? The tight ends play inline, they play H back, they play fullback, they play slot, personal protector, right? Field goal, punt. Like the tight ends do a lot. There's a lot on the tight ends plate. That's why I think a lot of these organizations, they carry so many of them. They carry four tight ends, 4 or 5 tight ends. You know what I'm saying? So that to me seems like the rationale as to why some of these tight ends get pushed up the board a bit. Right. Stepping away to take advantage of this commercial, but I will be here through the balance of day two of the draft, the third round. Like I said before, uh, stick around, stick around. I think Jake and I are going to try to do a joint stream where we stream on both of our platforms, and we'll chop it up. We'll recap this thing, and certainly take your guys' questions as well. So stay tuned for that. All right. Yep. Saw the Pregnon pick to the Jags. That was probably the Jags' best pick to this point. Pregnon going a lot later than I had anticipated. Um, yeah, I'm not sure if they've mentioned anything on the broadcast. If there being any types of concerns. I think maybe folks don't love his pass pro. Maybe I don't know. I don't know. It seemed like a more pronounced fall than that was actually appropriate. I saw the Xavier Thomas to Chicago. Comes a little bit as a surprise. I know Chicago, the depth chart just didn't have enough bodies, right? Um, I'm not sure why they felt that they had to go with Xavier Thomas as early as they did. I didn't see that one coming, but Ben Johnson apparently likes him, so he's a member of the Bears, and it certainly fits a need. Um, Albeit, again, that passing game will go through Colson Loveland and Luther Burden, and then I think at that point, I think Odunze is third in the pecking order, if you ask me. That's just my personal opinion, but they need another body there. I did miss the 90th overall pick, so let me double check there. See the draft tracker real quick. Hmm, Kalen Black. Okay. Kalen Black to San Francisco. Yeah. Yeah, I get it. Um, I don't like Kalen Black more than Jonah Coleman, but I certainly understand it. You need some guys to take a little pressure off of Christian McCaffrey, right? That offense last year was basically Christian McCaffrey or bust. So having another back, I guess Jordan James to compete with Jordan James, the back they took last year, makes sense. That makes sense. Not mad. And it's right around the time where Kyle Shanahan's going to take a running back, right? Third round coming to an end. He's going to pick a running back. That's his mo. Okay, let's see what the Raiders do here. Mendoza, little taken aback by Stooks from my perspective, but I think the NFL certainly had him in the first 40 picks. And then Kieron Crawford, high upside, edge rusher. I just don't know that he's going to play a lot in year one. Still some development necessary with him. He's still relatively new to the sport, frankly. I think he didn't play until maybe his senior year in high school or something like that, if I remember correctly. All right. Good old Matt Millen. You know what you can't take away from Matt Millen? He did draft Calvin Johnson. It was the third receiver in 3 years in the first round, but he did take Calvin. Can't miss that one up. So it was what was it? Roy Williams, Charles Rogers, Calvin Johnson, if I'm not mistaken, something like that. Or Charles Rogers was before Roy Williams and something or the other. Trey Zoom. Okay, this is an interesting one. I did a 7 round mock draft on the Raiders, and I got a lot of feedback from the Raiders fans, and they felt very strongly about the areas that needed to be addressed. Right, so the Mendoza pick obviously was foregone conclusion. The safety selection, right? Because most felt like they needed two. I think certainly one, but most Raiders fans, or at least a healthy number of Raiders fans, thought that maybe two safeties would be in order. So I get the Stooks pick, assuming he's going to play safety. He's played a lot of nickel, right? He's one of those big nickels. So, but assuming he's playing kind of that hybrid world, that made sense. But a couple areas of the team that they really wanted to prioritize certainly was the down line, defensive line, and I think the thing about it is you can get guys who can hold up, who can two gap for you well into day three. There's quite a few guys, right? You got his name's escaping me, from Michigan, Benny. You got the Cape Hearts from Clemson. You got Keenan from Alabama, Ryan Eason from Tennessee. You got quite a few of those nose one tech, zero tech players. So from that perspective, I could see why they might, may not necessarily prioritize that. I thought, especially considering how poor they were along the offensive line last year, they needed to address guard. Pregnon, to me, especially considering the scheme that they're going to deploy, was a perfect fit. You know what I mean? But the Raiders fans felt like, you know, the addition of Linderbaum, we got some young guys developing, i.e., Charles Grant at right tackle. You already have Powers Johnson there. Get back a healthy Colton Miller. Like, we're in pretty good shape. That was kind of their thought process. Very good selection by Dallas here, Jay Sean Barham. Um, really, really rounding out that pass rush, right? Rounding out that pass rush. Barham is recently converted to a full time edge. He has the off ball, on ball, as DJ is saying. He has that in his game. Um, yeah, oftentimes this is the best player on the field for Michigan. Oftentimes they're having a pretty good draft. I think Dallas is having a pretty good draft, all things considered. Um, they very much struggle to affect the quarterback, right? Obviously the trade of Michael Parsons, they just didn't have the horses. They didn't have the horses in season. They certainly, or just ahead of the season, and certainly in season as well. They made it a point to shore up the interior defensive line. Kenny Clark, Quentin Williams, Ezraku was a draft pick, so you see. Hopefully, he takes a step. Um, you brought in Malachi Lawrence, whom that's what they're looking for. They're looking for those balls of fire, twitched up edge rushers, and then you add Barham here. I'm cautiously optimistic about this young defense here in Dallas. I'm cautiously optimistic. I think somebody certainly is giving Jerry Jones some solid counsel. And of course, Caleb Downs. I think Caleb Downs is going to be phenomenal. Okay, the Rams are up next, and I don't think the Rams have taken a linebacker, which I think they could certainly use. I think they could use a receiver. I mentioned neither Adams nor Puka are signed beyond 2026. They go with Keegan Tross, who is an intriguing prospect. Um, the thing about the tackle position and the attitude that the Rams fans had about the prioritization of the tackle position. Um, Rob Havenstein, longtime right tackle, hurt, missed some of the year. Warren McClendon steps in and does a great job, right? He's a few years ago, day three pick. Remember, that's all the picks that the Rams had. All the Rams had, but they were nailing. They were nailing those day three picks, right? And Warren McClendon developed coming out of Georgia. He developed and he had a really strong season, right? So he goes in as your incumbent. He's your right tackle, started right tackle. And then the thing about the thing about it is that McClendon is going into the last year of his deal. So he puts together another strong season. He's going to cost. He's going to be big money, right? Steve Avila, a player that we loved coming out of TCU, he's going into the last year of his deal. He's going to cost a lot of money. I don't know that they're going to re-up with Puna Ford after 2026. So, down line is a question mark. Braden Fisk soon will be, up for a contract extension, as will Jared Verse. Byron Young will be up for a contract extension. So there's a lot of decisions to be made here, which again begs the question: why are we drafting all these tight ends? Why are we drafting all these tight ends? But to get back to Tross, I think that's probably a pick with an eye to the future. You're not going to be able to bring everybody back. I think they did extend Alaric Jackson, the left tackle, if I'm not mistaken. So you're probably going to pay Puka through the nose. You're probably going to break the bank with Jared Verse. Although Will Anderson to me is a superior player, you could expect a similar type of deal around that range, right? That's where the market is now. Byron Young, who has consistently hit double digit sacks over the last couple of seasons, he may be too expensive. He may be too expensive. So to me, my opinion, you take advantage of this really deep class of edge rushers and you start to just kind of prepare for the roster attrition, right? You start to get yourself situated for the fact that you may not be able to afford everyone, right? Or you may just decide you don't want to pay everyone. Of course, you traded and made the both corners, the both of the Kansas City starter corners from a season ago. You've paid both of them, so that obviously costs. Um, Stafford is back. You know what I mean? And I think about it through the prism of also, you're looking toward the future, but you're also playing for now, right? Your team is built to win now. So, who's helping you now, right? It isn't Ty Simpson. It probably isn't the tight end. It certainly isn't Trost, assuming McClendon and Alec Jackson are healthy. So who is helping you now, right? To me, you have to balance both. You have to balance the idea of, okay, we're looking to the future, as well as who can make a difference now. So um interesting. Interesting for sure. The Rams, I assume their thought process, obviously we're going to make another deep run, assuming Stafford is upright. We're not going to be in position to get into this nice, upcoming quarterback class as we kind of anticipate. But albeit, NIL has changed things. Guys will go back to school and be paid handsomely uh, at the collegiate level. So maybe that's the thought process of prioritizing Ty Simpson. But again, I forget which tight end they added. I think it was a good player, if I'm not mistaken. Was it Claire? Was it Max Claire that they added? Pretty sure it was. Yeah, I like Max Claire. If it was him, if I'm remembering correctly. But again, you got about 3, 4 other guys in front of him right now on the depth chart. And then again, eye to the future, probably can't re-up with McClendon and Avila. Probably got to make a choice there. Um, that's great, it's considering looking forward, but every pick can't be that way in my mind. There you go, Fins. There you go. There you go. It's been a mixed bag here with this new regime, but you can see when Chris Bell catches the ball, it's hell getting him on the ground, man. It just takes off on people. Um, the injury clearly led to this fall in the draft, but there's physical tools there that you can't teach. There's nobody quite like Chris Bell in this class that offers that kind of size and speed element, right? He makes it challenging on defensive backs. He's stronger than most of them, and he's faster than most of them. So, um, and that's a good pick. That's a good pick. You're in the midst of a rebuild. You just let him mend. Let him heal up. You know what I'm saying? No need to rush him onto the field. I thought they added who they add earlier. There was another receiver they added earlier, if I'm not mistaken. Was it Antonio Williams? Or am I conflating that with another team? Let me double check. Who else did Miami grab? Oh, they went with Cass Merrick. Caleb Douglas. They did draft him a receiver earlier. Yeah, I definitely would have drafted Bell ahead of Douglas, but again, their medical teams have a beat on all of that. Um, it's been an interesting class. So through 3 rounds, Proctor, Chris Johnson, Rodriguez, Douglas, Kasmerick, Chris Bell. I don't hate it. I don't hate it. I don't like the idea of Proctor ahead of Downs and Bain, right? Um, they could have done well with the Pregnon, you know. Maybe instead of Caleb Douglas, you go with Pregnon, or instead of Kasmerick, you go with Pregnon. Tight end was a need, but I wouldn't have prioritized Kasmerick. Jacob Rodriguez, slam dunk. It's an interesting class thus far. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7 more selections, so they're going to be busy on day 3. Eli Reardon. It's another tight end. It's going to be a ton of them on day three as well. There's going to be a lot of them on day three as well. Everybody's getting a tight end, man. And I'll bring up the point that I made earlier again on the recap. But certainly, there's a method to these teams' madness as it relates to the tight end position. That to me is the only real explanation. Because you can't legitimately think that these tight ends are going to play the majority of the snaps, offensive snaps, and be heavily targeted. It's just not going to happen that way. It's the utility, it's the blocking, it's the special teams. You know what I'm saying? It's those various personnel packages when you go heavy, goal line, so on and so forth. So you're on the clock, Mister C. See what the Steelers do here, man. This is Steelers' final pick of the night, and they should be fairly busy tomorrow as well. Well, they did move some draft capital. Ihanachour, Bernard, Aller, Everett. I think it's been a solid class thus far. I think it's been a solid class for the Steelers thus far. What you got, Cam? Probably a tight end. Let's see. Cam still got that fire, man. He still look like he can play. I mean, he is still playing. He's definitely done a good job. That's a good addition. I thought Dunker lasted a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but as I think about it, and I think about what some of his deficiencies are, it makes sense. It makes sense. Late day two. He's a tackle at Iowa. He's not going to be able to play tackle. He needs to play guard, but he has to learn how to play guard. So I can understand why he's moved a bit down the board, but this works out well. They lose Isaac Suomalo to free agency. He's real steady figure there, free agency. So now you got that young offensive line. You're rebuilding that. The Broderick Jones situation is really unfortunate because Broderick Jones is talented. Not sure if he's gonna fully recover. So you know, Ihana Chor comes in to help solidify that. I mentioned Suomalu that's lost via free agency. Now you can start thinking about Dunker as well. So he's a bit narrow in his lower body. He's not necessarily built as a guard. His frame suggests more tackle to me, but um I think you just, you get him to commit to being that, right? Like I said, he played tackle at Iowa. It's about getting your best five on the field, right? Iowa had quite a few interior offensive linemen that you probably hear their names called. Logan Jones already, but certainly there may be another one or two in day three. He played tackle, so they're just trying to get the best five on the field. But he needs to fully invest his time, which he shall, at guard, and hopefully he can be the long term answer there at left guard. Eisen with the mullet. You got to trade sometimes, Mr. C. That was what that was the time to trade. That was the time to trade. You picked that one. You picked that two. That was the time to trade, and here you are still in the third round. Vikings been busy, man. Vikings been busy. They have a lot of draft capital. It's been all meat and potatoes to this point. Banks, Galday, and Orange. Forgive the silence because I got a little distracted here. I was looking at some of the data from the live stream. Again, this is the first live stream we've done on the flagship channel in, I gotta say, man, close to like 8 months. It's been a long time. It feels good though. Feels good. Tried to break it out into its own, platform, but the demand was not there. The demand was not there, and I think some of the patrons of the channel just didn't find it. It didn't resonate, and they couldn't find it. So deprecate that, move away from that, bring this back into the fold. We probably won't do this as frequently as we have in the past. I really want to lean in on our typical standalone content and the Patreon. I really want to bolster the Patreon. I have some really, really good ideas for it. Nothing groundbreaking, but just the amount of content that I have designed for the Patreon. That's where I'm going to put a lot of my energy into. But we will have some lives from time to time, so we can keep it pretty interactive. That certainly energizes me. So stay tuned for that. Stay tuned for that. I don't plan on doing day three. I might. I'll probably prioritize just doing the final grades as standalone content. Um, Perhaps more in-depth breakdowns of perhaps specific players on Patreon. That remains to be seen. But as it relates to the 2027 class, I have a fairly in-depth content schedule and strategy that I'm excited to unveil. I'm excited to unveil. I think that will resonate for sure with the audience. So I'm excited about that, and I'm sharing it because I'm very excited about what the 2027 class has to bring as it relates to this particular channel. Caleb Tiernan. I think this is a good pick for the Vikings. They've struggled to field a healthy offensive line. I mean, I like Brian O'Neill, I like Christian Darrisaw a lot, but they just struggle to stay healthy. So at a certain point, you got to figure out when you're going to turn the page, and if you can do so without throwing the young man into the fire immediately, I think that generally makes sense. There was a chance. I think there was an off chance he could go in the second round. So to get him here at the end of the third, considering all of the draft capital that they have, back to back picks right here, it makes a lot of sense. I'd like to see Jonah Coleman come off the board right here. They need a back. They might prioritize a Mike Washington because he, a bit more explosive. But in terms of all around skill set, really like Jonah Coleman. And right now, Aaron Jones sits at that's my guy, Jacoby. That's my guy right there. That's the tweaker right there. You know what? I like seeing Jacoby. Yeah, we talked about the Vikings needing a safety. The player that he had developed into there at Miami. I think he's a good fit. I think he's a good fit. I wouldn't put him in the Harrison Smith mold necessarily, but he's physical. He blitzes. He's a good coverage guy in the short to intermediate parts of the field. He's a tone setter. He's definitely a tone setter. So I like that pick. That's a culture pick, and it addresses a need as well. At 5 INTs too, so nothing to sneeze at. He gets his hands on the football, makes plays. Um, PFF's rankings had him low, like super low, like down in like the 250 range, 260 range. And I was like, can't be, man. Can't be. Why don't you double up right here, Mr. C? Double up. Go get Jonah Coleman too. You don't need Charbonnet anymore. Get him out of there. You don't need no Charbonnet. Go get Jonah Coleman too. Get Price Coleman. Run that. That's your 1-2 right there. See what the Seahawks do. I think an edge might be in play, or if they like a receiver. Julian Neal. So he fits the mold. Saw him in Mobile. There were a lot of big corners in Mobile. He's 6'2". All right. He's effectively 6'2". He's a big corner. Big corner. Plays that cover three. man-to-man coverage. He challenges guys at the line of scrimmage. He does a pretty good job staying in phase deep down the field too. So yeah, I like this pick. I like this pick. You know, you keep the cupboard full in terms of the secondary. There's a bit of a attrition this offseason. You can't pay everybody. Um, you lose Bryant, you lose Tariq Woolen. I know you're looking for Kilgore right here, Mr. C. But he's a solid corner. He's a solid corner. Big corner. Big physical corner too. Is this the final pick right here? Jags. See how the Jags finish things off. Yeah, I'm not mad at that Julian Neal pick. I'm mad at it. Better than Will Lee. Comparable. Comparable. I think definitely comparable. He might be a little bit better. I was expecting more from Will Lee. I was expecting more from him, and I don't know. I don't know if he didn't get the invitation to Mobile, but some teams don't like guys when they don't compete, right? And Will Lee's Willie didn't have a great season. There were other players, other guys in the secondary that kind of eclipsed Will Lee. So yeah, yeah. I'm comfortable with Neil over Lee, but yeah, they're comparable. I'll put it that way. All right, Jalen Husky. Now I'll be perfectly frank with you. I'm not familiar with Jalen Husky. I did not get to Jalen Husky in my evaluation, so um, I'll be learning about him like some of you out there. Really weird draft class thus far for the Jags. So you prioritize the edge. You go back to A&M with Regis. You did get Pregnon. I think that's definitely the best pick they've made to this point. And then Husky. So interesting. Buffalo. I think we're into the compensatory picks here. So how far? How far does it go? Let's see. Shall we? They really did a nice update here to their draft tracker. It's a bit of more modern here on NFL.com. User interface is a bit smoother too. Performance of the website is improved. So nice touch. Sandman getting to me, but I'm gonna go and do what I need to be ready for this recap. I'm interested to hear some different thoughts about how day two of the NFL draft went. So I want to thank you for rocking with me. Like I said, live streams back on the channel, albeit not the most frequent, but they are back on the channel. So enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy day three of the draft, and I will see you soon. Take care.